Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I tried a new countdown timer thing and it nearly put me to sleep. My very special guest today is Spectrum Executive Editor, Alexander Carpenter. Great to have you on the program, Alex. It's good to see you.
Peter, thank you. It's great to be with you and your audience.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. You remind me a little bit of Matthew Corpman. So young and covering so much ground in that short amount of time. Can I say how old you are? Is that all right?
Yeah, please do.
So Alexander is only 45, and when I read his CV, I thought, boy, so many people spend their whole lives and maybe get a tenth of that. So well done on that, because you come across as someone that just has an inquiring mind, enjoys getting into things, loves discussion, loves building community, loves creating content, and you're just on a beautiful flow. I think that kind of, I bet it doesn't even seem like work, all that stuff that you've gotten under your belt.
It is fun, but yeah, there's some days where I'm glad the work day's over.
Okay, right. Well, when you get to my age, you just go with the flow.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's great to have you on the program. Can I just give a quick plug? Tomorrow we've got an interview, same time as this right now, but tomorrow with Harvey Brinese. And on the next day after that, same time, we've got Mike Colburn doing a special, what we're calling SDAQ&A Church, where we just hopefully every week or two we have a person that just does a gospel presentation. So that's coming up this week as well. So lots of people watching. Good to see. We've got Angela Lima and Sarah Sherwin from Oregon. We've got Angela from California, and we've got Moto Sapiens watching. We've got Stephen Beagles, big crowd. Andy Mack all the way from Western Australia. So great to have everyone here. Let's kick off, Alexander, with you sharing a little bit about your personal history. I'd like you to throw in some little tidbits of your Adventist experience growing up as well. You, like me, fifth generation Seventh-day Adventist. That means for sure some of our ancestors met Ellen G. White. And so share some of your Adventist happy times, some tribulations you may have had as a young person, just your personal history, and then touch on some of your academic history. And then we're going to get into chatting about a whole range of interesting topics. And we're going to open to the floor as well for questions later on too.
Great. I'm looking forward to those questions. First, I have appreciated the interviews that you've been doing, Peter, and the conversations that the audience has been a part of. I think it's a really vibrant, open-minded community that you're all building here. And so I tip my hat to you for your efforts. So it's an honor to be with you. It's also the other reason I did not hesitate when Jillian Ford connected you to me is because I love her. I think she's doing really great work. And also because I have to talk about Australia, because I'm coming to you as a very ignorant but enthusiastic Australian, because my mother was born in Australia and came to the U.S. When she was 12, but kept her green card, and she's still around. Looking forward to sharing this with her. She always kept a kind of Australian bias in the home. When she was excited, she was a good, strict Adventist mother, but when she was excited, she loved to laugh like a kookaburra. And we always had hot crust buns on Easter morning.
Oh, I love it.
And I can get into a little bit of that history of why she came and that kind of helped to form who I am. Number one, really briefly on that side of the family, I'm a mix of immigrants to Australia from Ireland, the McMahon family,
Oh, yeah.
and then later kind of Eastern European immigrants who came as members of the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah, I've
And
heard
so,
about that.
so yeah, so my grandmother, Lydia, who was a Nicolid, she was the daughter of the General Conference president for the Reformed Church, married a McMahon. In fact, his father was part of this. There's a book here that my uncle David McMahon wrote about his grandfather and his grandfather's brother, who rode from kind of this lakes region, Gibbs Point lakes, kind of in Victoria in like the 1910s. And they were new converts to Adventism and rode up to Avondale to go to school. And it was like covered in the press. So,
wow.
So yeah, here we go. Lakes Entrance, Cunningham in Victoria. Anyway.
Wow. You really do have an Adventist history there.
Yeah.
With Australia, I mean, with a connection here.
Yeah. I've never been to Australia, so that's the really embarrassing part here, but we're among friends here, so I can confess. My brothers, I have 3 younger brothers, and we finally got the last one on track, so we plan to all go and kind of visit all the places that we have heard about someday soon here.
Wow, that's amazing. There's Andy Mack, who is a member of our group, and she's watching from Western Australia. I just sent her a message. Are you two related, maybe? She has McMahon ancestry as well. And she's just said in great Aussie style, I wonder if he is a rally of mine. Nope, he is a rally of mine. So you must have held up that book. It must be a...
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So Andy, maybe fill us in about how you've matched the link there. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that I had some relatives come up from Perth and visit my mom. So
yeah. Wow. It'd be good to find a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah. We can talk about my favorite movie, The Nostradamus Kid.
Yes. When we were kind of chatting in Messenger off air, and you mentioned that early on, I actually met Bob Ellis once when that movie came out, and he was doing a bit of a junket around Australia, and we had a few, myself and a few other Adventists were chatting to him after his kind of little chat and talk about it. Fascinating guy, and what a great movie. And you might already know this little bit of gossip or trivia. The tents they used in the movie were actually the camp meeting tents they used for church camps. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about the Nostradamus Kid.
Well, I was an undergrad at Andrews studying religion and English literature, and one of my beloved English professors, Beverly Matiko, recommended the movie to me. At the time, I was really fascinated with portrayals of Adventism in novels and in popular culture. And so I watched it on a VHS tape and loved it. And then I've recommended it to my PUC students over the years as a must see if they want to kind of look at a depiction of growing up Adventist in a different time and place. But I think one that still, there's something I think that the movie does well, which is show a questioning Adventist on a journey.
Yeah. And he's a very famous Australian actor too. Is it Noah
Taylor, I think?
That's right. Yeah, he's gone on to do some very incredible movies. How old were you when you watched that?
Oh, I think I was maybe 21 or so, something like that.
My generation, where I'm a bit younger than boomers, but a bit older than Gen X. So there's a little generation slotted in there that we don't really connect with either of those. But my generation perhaps was the last to really relate to that kind of movie and the apocalyptic upbringing we had and the time of trouble and all of those things, and a few nightmares about the close of probation, etc. Do you think that your generation and younger have kind of bypassed a lot of that scary kind of Adventism, or does it still permeate some of the Adventist culture?
It does. I have a young Adventist on our staff. He's still in academy. He's one of our great journalists, just an incredibly gifted kid, and he's really upset because he's a senior at this academy, and from Wednesday night to Sabbath evening, they have to go up in a wilderness survival experience, read chapters of the Great Controversy, and this is in a fairly mainstream school, denominational school. They're comfortable with, this is not a strict school, but they're still doing this. Of course, he called this like apocalyptic interrogation survival training.
Yeah,
which is familiar to many folks of earlier
exactly.
generations, but it's important to recognize with all the changes that exist, there's still a reversion to this sort of thing, and some kind of that's what he called it. He called it a apocalyptic hazing ritual.
I love it. That's a good way of looking at it. And I've a lot of people younger than me say, "Oh, that's not my experience," and then I chat to them a little bit more, and out it comes that, "Oh, well, when I was 7 or 8, I did have some concerns that would I be saved or not." And a good friend of mine, his daughter, when she was about 12, she was having some nightmares and Sabbath school classes where they were talking about running to the hills. So I think there's a desire for people to say, "Hey, that's not our church," but in some ways it's because they want to not share that to other people. When you watched that movie, The Nostradamus Kid, did it bring back any specific memories for you that you can share? Or was it just a general milieu of this kind of hazing experience?
Watching the movie, so I grew up in kind of a two worlds of Adventism. On my mom's side, you had these immigrants to America who were from immigrants to Australia, and they were pretty conservative Adventists, but incredibly opinionated. So they would like shouting Dez Ford and Robert Brimsmead. There was like arguments around the table before dinner. I had a very boisterous uncle who had left the Reform Adventist church because it had become Babylon itself. And he was the son of he was my great uncle, the son of the General Conference president of the Reform, and it had apostatized. So everything, there was apostasy everywhere.
Babylon has fallen.
And that's how they really connected. My mom loved it. She loved to get in there, discuss Dez Ford with what it meant, and they came to it both from they were fairly conservative, searching for grace always, though, within a kind of perfectionistic, with that kind of upbringing that they had as boomers, but very interested in thinking for themselves. Nobody was touting any kind of party line. It was just a huge melange of different arguments happening all the time. So that was really, I was really interested in it. On my father's side, my grandmother was a third generation Adventist, and she was born in 1927. And and they'd come out of the Midwest, farmers. And then after my grandpa served in World War II, they moved out to California. And they were just your classic rising middle class. My grandma taught at public schools. They didn't work for the denomination, and my grandpa worked for Ford Aerospace. But it was only later in life where I realized my grandpa wasn't an Adventist. It was sort of shocking to me, because my grandma always had her Bible and the Sabbath school lesson quarterly together, and she did it. Every day she does it. She's 95, and
Wow.
there's not a day that goes by that she doesn't do the Sabbath school lesson. Very faithful. And my grandpa had Adventist Today and Spectrum magazine. So as a teenager, I kind of realized. I remember talking with my mother, like, "Oh, Grandpa's not an Adventist. I didn't realize." And it's like, he is a Christian. So I'd have these kind of conversations with my grandpa, and he just always maintained a basic Christianity, attended church with my grandma, and even shocked the family. He was a greeter. He's pretty quiet guy, and he was a greeter at church and really loved the community of the church, even though he never joined.
Wow. So you didn't realize, because he would attend church and be involved and love the community, but had never officially joined.
Yeah. So I had these sort of things there that made me always kind of they were coming at this giant denominational, paradigm that you enter into. And yet there were always these kind of things that cut against it in a kind of sideways approach, which I think, I am just lucky. And I think, even though I went to self-supporting academy for a time, but I also went to public school, church school, homeschooled. So all those experiences always, I think having those experiences shaped me, because I'm, not really, I appreciate what it takes to create institutions, but I also see how institutions have to have outside critique if they're going to remain relevant and serve the mission that they have.
And in many ways, that, I think, was probably, and I'll get you to chat a bit in a minute about the history of Spectrum, but I'm guessing that Spectrum and the forums, their hope was to offer a bit more of an outside but still inside perspective. And I think to a large degree they certainly have. I mean, Spectrum and Adventist Today are two incredible journals, shall we say, that have been around a long time and produce amazing content all the time. Lauren Seibold with AT, just incredible amount of material coming out that really does push against the boundaries. This morning I couldn't go to sleep till 4:00. I get excited about my interviews, and I was watching an interview you did in 2022 with Dr. Gil Valentine. And you were talking about his book. I'll just quickly bring it up. I always love giving it a bit of a plug.
We cannot plug that book enough. It's so good.
So good. Yeah. So there it is. Ostriches and Canaries, Dr. Gil Valentine. And I highly recommend people go and buy that book. But you were having an interesting discussion with him on a Spectrum, maybe the Spectrum YouTube channel, 2022. And you were asking him about, a lot of people were asking him questions, but you asked, I think, about the leadership, and had they kind of learnt some lessons from the past? Was there any hope that perhaps this kind of openness that a lot of the progressive Adventists hope for would eventuate? And he said that he was positive and hopeful, but that kind of administration leadership is baked into Adventism. And I think if you're part of a denomination that thinks it's the remnant, that has a special calling, a unique last message for the last days, it does put it into a bit of a end of time loop, an apocalyptic loop that in some ways can't really break from it. He mentioned the Anglicans, when they were dealing with women's ordination, that they had their high church kind of journal and their lower church journal, and they seem to come at it very organically and in a kind of a kind, rational process, and were able to fit both kinds of believers, for want of a better word, into their one umbrella. Adventists have never seemed to do that so well. Why do you think that is? Because when I read Ostrich's, I absolutely loved it, because it it creates this kind of striking brought to life era, the 1966 to 1979 era,
Yeah.
in an incredible way that makes you go, oh, I get it. I get why that happened at Glacier View and beyond, and I get why it's always happened on loop within Adventism, because that kind of leadership is baked in. So what do you think about my little assessment there? Why do you think this loop seems to persist, no matter how hard the progressives try and say, hey, can we be a little bit more inclusive?
I think there's some original sins in Adventism that that are so baked in that change doesn't to administrators who are not creative. All they see is change is like ripping a pearl necklace, and you can't just remove one pearl. They all slide off. They're all equal in value. And I think that in supporting the residue of our founding, the original growth, the impetus for Adventism, the explanation for what happened on October 22, 1844, it's kind of that core DNA, and the epistemological framework that's required to buy into that then has to be replicated in increasingly hard to swallow ways.
Yes.
But you have to maintain that same epistemological framework, use proof text, string random texts from various parts of scripture together to justify other beliefs. And if you start to change something like women's ordination and say, well, we can't just string text together, then they say, well, if we don't do it to stop women from being ordained, then we can't do it all the way down this chain, this necklace. And if we ordain women, then the whole thing collapses, and there goes Adventism. And it's because we don't have, we thus far have not had the quality of leaders, and that's why I'm hopeful. Despite the evidence, in many ways, that there are examples of organizations who have thought about their survival in ways that have allowed them to change and adjust and adapt and actually survive. And Adventism right now is like tight. There's such a tight fist. And by that, I mean a kind of mental fist. And I mean the metaphor of power as well. That you have to justify it. There's a kind of destructive intellectual miasma in the church these days.
Yeah, I don't know why, because I was one of those hopefuls, the hopeful progressives, in the Jan Paulson era. And I gave a good 30 years of my life to North New South Wales Conference and helping to create with scores of others what we felt was a Jesus-focused, worship-oriented, community building environment. And we often had pushback, and I wasn't officially employed at all. but there was a bunch of us that really had this hope. And I think it's when I held, because I say this all the time, I let people know I'm an older dad. And I'm sitting there with my 2-year-old and I'm watching the Antonio thing, and something ruptured within me as I'm holding an older dad, kind of given my best years to Adventism, with full of hope and offering hope every week. I'm holding little Renee. I'm watching this on YouTube. Something just ruptured within me that the progressives have been offering false hope. This is never going to change. And so for me, all of the way the things aligned and fell into place, I just couldn't stay anymore. And then soon after started this channel. And one of the things that has surprised me the most is that, as you said, in spite of all the evidence, there is this ongoing hope that permeates Adventist today, permeates Spectrum, permeates the progressive, permeates Gil Valentine even in his book. And I can no longer see where that hope springs from, even though I spent my life drinking from that well, Can you help me in my slightly jaded position of I've just lost I lost the hope. Where has it gone? How do you maintain? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering, how does and perhaps don't speak for yourself, but how does the progressive maintain that kind of hope that it will change, that it will get better? Because we're not talking about standards and being able to have a little bit more up-tempo worship music or worship styles. We're talking about a deep theology here that is administered in a very, like you said, a firm grasp. And when I look back at Adventist history, that firm grasp seems to have been there all the way along.
I am not, I respect the journey that you're on, and this may not be new to you, so I don't want to impose anything. I'll just explain for me. I went through, the dark night of the soul just on basic, thinking about religion itself. And I read quite a bit in philosophy in my 20s, and that really helped me to think beyond just, what is a doctrine, to how do beliefs function, and then how does, kind of work at the foundations of reality. And I read a philosopher, Richard Rorty, who's an anti-foundationalist. People would think of him in terms of relativism in a for many folks in a kind of frightening way. But it really helped me to get away from thinking about truth in a really objective way, and think about how truth operates. He's a pragmatist. He comes out of the American pragmatic tradition. And so it really helped me to think about, he thinks about truth as a habit or tool for action. And so when I think about Adventism, I think about how it functions. And the reason I made a commitment, I was baptized in academy, in the pool, and that was in part because the girls' dean really put some pressure on me, because I was going to go out and do some colportering during the summer to help pay my way through academy. And she kind of implied that if I wasn't baptized, Jesus wouldn't bless as much. So, my heart maybe was not pure, but it happened. But it was actually later in my 20s that I just kind of was walking around, and I just said out loud, actually, to someone, I'll always be an Adventist. And for me, I got rid of the questioning. I'm just always going to be an Adventist. I may not be fun at dinner parties, but I swim in those waters, and I'm interested in it. Now, I do have I'm perhaps a little too idealistic in this way. I think that there's more Adventists in the world than people in the Netherlands. There's more Adventists than 2/3 of the countries in the world. So, if we were, a group of a million total people around the world, I probably wouldn't be as hopeful. But there's something very difficult to control when you're thinking about global Adventism. And the future is very hard to predict when you think about, a million Adventists in Brazil, where they have now emerged as a tithe contributing force within global Adventism. And you have the decline of Adventism in the U.S., in Europe, and other parts of the world, and you have 4 million Adventists in Eastern Africa. You have these kind of incredible, we won't get into the specifics of it, but these incredible 250,000, 300,000 baptisms there in the South Pacific Division, and those sort of things. We can talk about what that means separately, but there's a kind of dynamism in Adventism. So there's that. And then there's also the institutions. Our educational system certainly has plenty of issues, but we're continually opening new schools in places of the world where people don't have access to just basic education. And then you add in the kind of benefit that just comes from health institutions and caring about health in a way that, we may be kind of tired of, getting health rammed down our throats in some parts of the world, but other parts of the world, they're just, this is new and it is life-changing and life-producing. So those sort of things, I see Adventism as a kind of, as a mechanism for values, not maybe its values, not the main values, but I don't even think Ted Wilson can control
that mechanism.
Yeah, it's beyond anyone's control, and I honestly think there are some church leaders who are scared about what the potential is. There's conferences in Africa that are in total revolt within the current structure, and that as the old line goes, it's going to be interesting to see if the center can hold. And if the center can't hold, there's going to be some horrible things that happen, but also going to be some opportunities in this structure we call Adventism. And the last thing I'll say on that is just there's a kind of beauty. Like, I am, enjoying talking with you, and I'm looking forward to answering questions from all these folks. I wouldn't do that with a bunch of, Methodists necessarily, but there's just a sense of kinship because we've shared the good and the bad of Adventism, and it brings us together in a way that's sort of transcendent, in that we just it's hard, especially, when you're older in life, to build good friendships and connections with people, unless, you love the same bands or you like the same movies. But it takes a lot of work to get to the level that just saying, "Hey, I'm an Adventist," and you're like, "We have some things to discuss." That's something that's sort of beautiful, and that, the church leadership can't control that. That's up to us. We control it, and we can define that kind of Adventism person to person.
Yeah, I certainly, when I'm reading the books like we just mentioned, Ostriches, watching Nostradamus Kid, what's that one, Wellville, with
Road to Wellville.
It's funny, just a little aside there, because they came out around a similar time, those two movies, from memory. And I was a special education teacher at Avondale up the road here, and we got a fax from the GC saying that we shouldn't go, and via our conference, we shouldn't go and see those two movies. And again, that's that control thing. So Adventism has this strange desire to suppress and mind control, but a strain that kind of creates this rebellion amongst a lot of, not rebellion so much, but it creates interesting dialogue. I remember in the 90s, early 90s, I was doing lots and lots of music all around the place. And I think in 94, 95, or 93 or 94, in the 2-year period, I did 500 gigs,
Wow.
mostly in Adventist churches. 21 gigs in the Philippines, 17 in Japan. It was just full on. And what I remember about that was not just the gigs, but the incredibly interesting conversations I'd have at night with the people you billeted out in. And sometimes it'd be a conservative family, sometimes it'd be a liberal family, sometimes it'd be a Dez Ford fan family, sometimes it'd be an Andresen fan family or whatever, a Burnside family. And you're right, there's this incredible, can't take your eyes off this thing called Adventism that has a very healthy camaraderie in it, but also a lot of stuff that you feel like you want to speak against. Sometimes I felt like I was a musician in the counterculture of the 60s, where you were kind of, speaking out against politics and whatnot. You felt like in the 80s and 90s, you had that opportunity to speak out against the church. But I felt like when the compliance document came in, that this power to ratchet all of that in stepped up a notch. And so I wonder if this Adventism you talk about, unless unless the Spectrum and the AT guys and the progressives can prevail, is it going to squeeze it out? Because I haven't really seen any kind of revival for the last 44 years that has truly taken root. And I guess that's the kind of thing I'm referring to about the hope, not so much how one sees truth in it or how it sees it as a machine for good or deep interest, but whether this idea of it ever being a place where the progressive mind, the Spectrum article, the AT guys, whether that they will ever truly grasp or gain a kind of a more of an equal balance or a real place without feeling pressured. Like, for example, I've had one person in 2 years, and I put out the challenge, currently employed, pastor, ordained, come on the show and say you support women's ordination. One person was able to do that. Many wrote to me behind the scenes and said, we do. I said, well, come on the show. So people say, oh, it doesn't affect our church, but that's no pastor in Australia will come on the show, in the world would come on the show. So to me, that's great to have a wonderful mechanism that brings health and ADRA and good works and all this stuff into the communities all around the world, regardless of the Ted Wilson kind of power structure. But I guess I'm speaking of that essence of hope where one can feel like your voice is heard beyond the suppression. Does that make sense? It's a slightly nuanced, different kind of hope I'm speaking to. Because if you're in a church that will not allow that the pastors, no matter for what reason, won't come on a show like mine and publicly say they support women's ordination, that's a real indictment of something wrong with the health of an institution.
Yeah. The thing that I'll say there is that I think the ministry is kind of in crisis in what we might call the developed world or the Western world. It's just we've been working on a story, and this parallels what you just said. We have some folks who work in the church structure at a up the hierarchy, who will talk about this personally but won't go on the record saying what the crisis they're facing. It'll be interesting to see what the numbers are for the enrollment in theology programs that we're looking at. It there's not a replacement, and that's in part
Wow.
because your average young Adventist doesn't want to go into a job where they are afraid to speak their mind as a believer. And that's the climate that we're in right now. They have to be very careful. Now there's definitely pastors in, California where I am, who should be on your show because they are ordained women. They support women's ordination. The union president supports women's ordination, and the constituency, 80% in the big vote that they took in 2012 supported women's ordination, with Ted Wilson standing right there, trying to intimidate them. So I will be interested to see this. We've got a GC session coming up, albeit annual council reporting every day. We'll see if they allow me in. They used to allow Spectrum in. I've got some things up my sleeve to see, but we'll be there. We'll be reporting on it. We'll be watching it. Anyone can watch it live, and there's some forces in play here that I think will create change. Now, I don't know where that change will go, and that's one of the reasons I stick around and watch the show of Adventism, is because it helps me think about the world itself. And the show, we all have our own national politics, local politics, and it's we're on this blue marble spinning in space, trying to figure this thing out. So keeping an eye on all those different forces, I think it's not always fun, but it's kind of what we have to do as humans if we're going to really participate, and if we have values that we want to fight for. When this GC session happens, July 3 through 13, whatever happens at the top of the ticket, and there's only one ticket that we're aware of, but there'll be some fights happening behind the scenes, and I think it'll be, after we see those directions. There's been a lot of things bottled up, in part because the last GC session was postponed 2 years, and really they just kind of roll, so we really haven't had a time to air out these things for 10 years, which has never happened before in Adventism. And so maybe one reason we feel so claustrophobic and stopped up is we've had a little too much protein and everything's stuck in the system, and it's time to see what comes out when the church leaders talk.
The mind boggles. I remember you saying that that you had been to the council, the autumn council, and the GC sessions in an official capacity. Can I ask a couple of quick questions? Because there's an era there around the compliance document that I find really hard to pin down. And while I've got you, so this is me just kind of picking your brain for my personal reasons, and hopefully others enjoy what we're talking about. But I remember, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong with the dates, but I think 2018 Autumn Council was where Ted was really cleverly putting through this document, this policy, from an idea and a discussion point into policy. It got through, and then 2019, I think from memory, was the Norwegian guys and the Danish guys getting, there's a kind of a 3 or 4 tier scale of reprimand or warning, then reprimand, then some kind of actions would take. Is that right? 2019. And then of course we have lockdown come in. Those guys had been given 1 year to get their act together, and I think there were 6 from memory unions that were warned, and a couple of them were reprimanded. I can't remember the 3-level tier sanctioning process. if you were there, can you tell us what the vibe was like? Jan Paulson was in tears, and Ted Wilson almost said to him, "Hey, well, you guys voted it through." And I found, there was a few Aussies that kind of suddenly had a few things to say, and I thought, well, you guys should have said that last year. There seems to be an incredible power play going. I've witnessed more publicly. I can see what's going on with the Ted Wilson kind of crowd. You're giving me a little bit of encouragement, and some people I've spoken to have hinted at this as well, that there's behind the scenes a real brewing of a progressive pushback. Yeah. So, give me a bit of insight into what was going on in that Autumn Council 2019. Where can I go, B, to find the actual compliance document? I've had pastors out there searching. No one can find it. I can find reference to it. But anyway, and three, what happened next? It kind of then disappeared. And I watched every day of the recent Autumn Council. I just couldn't find it anywhere, but it was going to be the big thing. Next year, pull your head in. We've got a year to turn this around.
Yeah.
Give me some thoughts on all of that.
First, Bonnie did that reporting, and I'm going to talk to her and see if we could get you that compliance document.
Thank you.
Two, what I understand happened is that Ted Wilson really overreached, and it wasn't just a progressive pushback. There's that, but the progressives aren't big enough to make that happen politically. The reason Ted Wilson overreached is because the power at those annual council or spring meeting, the bishops, if you want to say, or the barons of the church are the union presidents, over 300 of them.
Right.
And they are really the power structure, because they are the next, one of those, 100 in division, or in a large one, or dozens, I should say, are going to become the next division president.
So just to jump in there, what you're saying is the union level leadership presidency has more power than the division level presidents.
Yeah.
But they're often, yes, and they're often a bit more behind the scenes, aren't they? Like, they have the power. They're the ones moving into future powers of position up the ladder. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the division president can use kind of a bully pulpit, but they have their own. They're often the chair of this university. They're often the chair of the healthcare institutions, and so they have a kind of they have some autonomy there that we need to recognize. So really quickly, what Ted did is he overreached by using this conversation about compliance. What he meant was compliance on women's ordination and other kind of progressive things. But the problem is compliance also implied finances. It also implied other forms of obedience to working policy, and this is from the General Conference Accounting Service leaders who have communicated this. And if you watch, you'll see this. Sometimes they'll hint at this. Everyone is out of compliance in some way.
Yeah.
And so Ted Wilson bumbled into opening up a can of worms that threatened everyone. And so they said,
and then on the committee, who decides then who falls and who stands?
Exactly.
And so also who then decides if they make changes down the track too.
Yeah. And again, you've seen other leaders get out of whack like this because they don't understand how to work within the structure. You'd think a GC president would know how to work within the structure. Falkenberg did this as well. He wasn't a good tactician within the existing framework and couldn't handle the politics. So he was always working outside, and he was a kind of entrepreneurial type, and his financial entrepreneurship is what really got him there. But he jumped in there as a conference president, elevated to that. So Ted Wilson he can work. The GC is his home. It's this kind of, very controlled, sad place, but he can't manage the personalities where there's all these other power places. So, it's like those fun, that history of War of the Roses where, you've got a king, everyone bows to him, but it's really the barons who, collectively can add up their grievances and bring up a greater power to, the realm than what the king has with the crown. So, that's my very, simplified way.
Yeah.
The reason, and I have heard that compliance stuff is dead. Nobody wants to talk about it. And Ted basically hurt himself politically by doing that. So he hurt himself in 2012 by trying to fight women's ordination very publicly, lost that battle. And then he got, came back with, thought 2015 GC session would shut everyone up. Of course, it didn't on women's ordination. So then he tried to use this kind of hard power compliance thing, which was a tactical mistake. And then basically COVID shut down the church.
He was lucky.
Kind of like standby mode. 2012 or 2022 happened. There was quite a bit of talk in the nominating committee looking for alternatives. Not, I would say there was some, we reported it out, and you can find it on the Spectrum website. What happened in there? There were some irregular things that happened with the nomination of him and the voting. And there was also a will among folks to basically live with the devil they had than the devil they didn't know. And so he was voted back in. But those tensions still exist, and that's why it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we head to 2025.
Even though I've left, I can still enjoy all this. So, I encourage anyone that's on the fence thinking they'll leave, don't worry, you're not going to be dead to all this.
That's right.
This conversation is so refreshing, and I'm so glad you said yes to coming on the program, because a lot of people involved in this kind of topic are very wary of coming on my show because some of them have a lot to lose. And that's why, and thank you, Gillian Ford, who's watching, kind of got this idea in my head to start, I think, what I've called the scholars, where I invite the scholars on and I don't ask hard questions. I don't interrupt. I just say, hey, go for it. And I was even expecting that maybe that's what this was going to be, where I just had to sit back and say, go for it. So thank you for letting me ask these hard questions.
I enjoy having a conversation.
It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. And I find it very, very refreshing that someone in the know speaks freely without fear of losing their job or their standing in the community. And I think, that's something that can be attributed to Spectrum and to AT, that they have cultivated a culture where the people that write for them, work for them, do have a sense of freedom and autonomy, and you're not going to be ripped down. So I want to segue from that into, can you share with us some history of Spectrum? Mm-hmm. Is it called Spectrum Magazine still, or is it just called Spectrum? So share with us the history, and I want you to go deep. Let us know, is that the first one or the
first issue of the journal?
Oh, wow.
1969. Look at that cool text.
Yeah. Can I just read that again? The top, it says a quarterly journal of the Association of Adventist Forums. Wow. So 10 years before October 27, 1979, the Dez Ford Forum, the famous one. There we go.
This is volume 11, 1981. November 1980. They were all over Glacier View accounts, position papers by Fritz Guy, Bill Shea, Glacier View and After reactions. So
Incredible. Look, so this particular
and Neil Wilson responded in here.
oh wow. Gold. We'll have to get you back another time and we'll do a show where we can just look through some journals and read some excerpts from them. So take us back to 1969. What was going on? Who started it? Who was the committee? What inspired them?
Yeah.
Did you ever meet them? Way you go. Tell us all about the history of Spectrum.
Well, I was born in 1979, so I didn't meet them, but I met them because I was an undergrad, and there's a weekend ethics conference, and because I had no social life, I went to the ethics conference on campus.
As you do.
And one of my religion professors, Woody Whidden, nudged me. I was sitting next to him and said, "Watch out for this next guy. He's a maverick." And onto the stage walked Roy Branson, one of the founders of Spectrum, edited it in the late 70s up through the late 90s. And, he got his PhD from Harvard. He was the grandson of a General Conference president. What's really interesting is that he was one of the first people to really talk, and let me say it this way, a white person in Adventism, really talk about social action. There's a story told while he was at Harvard that they kind of walked out of church and there were some people protesting. It was the 60s, so a lot of protesting happening. And the other Adventists said, "Oh, that's very nice. Let's go to have Sabbath lunch." And he said, "No, I think I'll stay here." And he walked across the street and joined the protest. And so he actually walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Joshua Heschel. The third time is written about in the Dallas Daily News. His name's there in the news in a later report on it. So a real, and he taught at the seminary, and that's one of the big moments. Very briefly, because as you know, as you're intimating here, there's these moments in Adventism where maybe the horizons become clearer and there's more space, and we realize that if we're serious about the divine, we're talking about something infinite, and when we put borders on it, we're destroying God. So he was a seminary professor. He'd take students down to do social action, help the poor instead of doing evangelistic crusades, kind of pioneering stuff. Anyway, of course, the church was changing and said, "No way." So the real history of the organization is in the 60s. You had this generation of folks who were starting to ask questions. Many of them grew up Adventist, but were reading outside the denomination, going to graduate schools. And so they started to, they couldn't talk about these sort of things at church and in Sabbath school, because in those days, people were pretty strict about sticking to the lesson. And so they would meet on Sabbath afternoons in what they called an Adventist forum. And they were scattered around not just the US, but we have a Sydney Adventist forum and around Europe as well. And so there was a sense of, hey, let's communicate. This is the days before email. So they said, how can we kind of let each other know what's happening? We just heard a great talk by someone. I want to hear that talk. So there was always a dream with Roy Branson to do a journal. And so they met with a physician scholar at Loma Linda, Mularis Couperis, who was the first editor. And so they formed, and they met with the brethren, as they say, and they agreed in 1967 to remain independent as an association of these Adventist forums, publish a journal, and the church basically said and approved. There's a written document that says, you guys do your thing. We think it's important for you to do your thing separately. That way we're not responsible for the things you say. And there was a pretty good relationship until the late 70s and really Glacier View, and then the early 80s with the various crises and Spectrum doing journalistic work and not just scholarly work, it
Yes.
became huge, and the journal really exploded in popularity. And Roy Branson, who lived near the GC, son of a GC president, or I mean, a grandson of a GC president, got to writing pretty directly and started comparing GC leaders to the leaders of the
Regimes.
USSR at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that really ticked them off. So there is a meeting, an annual council meeting. I wrote about it in one of my editorials last year, where they denounced Spectrum at the annual council and said,
What year was that?
I think
Roughly
83, 84, somewhere
they
in there.
renounced it.
Yeah, denounced it.
Sorry.
Yeah. And but things changed. Again, Jan Paulsen came in the very late 90s, and Bonnie Dwyer is just a sweet spirit, wonderful person. And, you can't, it might be easy to see a kind of Harvard educated editor popping off on different things. Although Roy loved worship, he wrote he always attended church. He always loved worship. But Bonnie really brought in, she's such an advocate for the local in Adventism, always saying, who cares what the GC president says? I'm going to my local church. We say what we want to say there, do what we want to do. So she kind of reformed some attachments. At the same time, Jan Paulsen, who had written for Spectrum back in the day when he was a young scholar,
Really?
was quite open to the spirit of Spectrum and tried to make some changes, although didn't on women's ordination, unfortunately. And then, we have to recognize that Ted Wilson now is going to be, except for A.G. Daniels in the early 1900s, he will be the longest serving president. And so we're living in something we've never really dealt with before, which is just this incredibly fundamentalist. The guy reads Ellen White or the Bible and sometimes the news
and brags about it. Yeah.
So we're living in a kind of world now. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of the brief history.
That's amazing. That's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that heyday you're talking about, which would have gone for that first decade and into the 80s, when they were denounced, did it impact the kind of what's the word for it? Got a mental blank. Like the readership numbers.
That was the height of our readership, probably, in terms of the journal.
So being denounced kind of gave you even more advertising.
Yeah, it gave some of the supporters headaches because they had to, they tried. I've talked to some folks from that era, and they really tried to, create some reconciliation. But that was, I wish I would have been in Australia in the early 80s. I think that would have been a really amazing time. The extremes of
yeah, I lived here, right through it, right in Ground Zero, Kurrambong.
Yeah, amazing. So there's some interesting.
I must say that the church was very good at suppressing information. My generation were literally late teens, maybe at that time, to early 20s, so 18 to 22-year-olds, and we just noticed all of a sudden the cool hip youth leaders had gone. And the generation above, the Gil Valentine generation, the younger than my parents, but the boomers, they would all disappear into their little Sabbath school classes, and there'd be hushed tones. And my generation was like, something's going on. We don't know what it is. And then the GC would bring out these Adventist apologists that would go all around the country, and they'd come to Avondale College here and they'd speak from the pulpit, and it was all positive Ellen White stuff. And we didn't have social media. So if you weren't in the know, they had a very powerful way of just not kind of letting us know what was going on. So all we saw was a decline of our social kind of activities, of youth leaders leaving. Hundreds left here in Australia and America as well. But underground, the tapes were just going off quietly, being run off to everybody. And I remember talking to Dez Ford and Gillian, and they were saying that GNU had in 1984, around 200,000 subscribers in their journal, their magazine. So there was a lot going on, and I lived between Avondale College and the Memorial Church, which was the real Concerned Brethren. They loved the Standish brothers, and then the college church loved Dez Ford. It's literally a 5-minute walk from each other up the hill on the same campus. And I noticed the fighting, particularly from the Concerned Brethren types. They were the more, they'd pull out the plugs of our amplifiers and stuff like that when we're doing music and stuff. But anyway, during this time, Spectrum is kind of growing and sharing more and more information. And this guy, Roy Branson, isn't it? He sounds like like you said, a maverick. And he died in the late 90s, did he?
Yeah, he did. No, later than the 90s. He turned over the editorship to Bonnie between 98 and 99. And that's just when I was starting at Andrews. And so I read, the first issues I read were some of the final issues that he did. One on comedy, which was just so great to see somebody thinking about the comic in the Bible. So he was always really fresh. I meant to say, at that ethics conference, one of the things that what drew me to his vision for Adventism is he started talking about smoking. Now, you grow up in Adventist, that's bad for you to do. But he was talking about it, hey, if this is our value, and this was at a conference with some their Cato Institute, which is a national libertarian think tank. They had someone there, and he was very conversant with their philosophy and discussing with them and some other non-Adventist ethicists. But he was talking about, if Adventists are really serious about this value, health, not smoking, why aren't they supporting legislation in the government, in Congress, to not allow the tobacco companies to advertise to children, to fight that? And it was just this moment where I realized, if I care about these values, I want to not just, figure out what I believe for myself, but also think about how they make the world a better place beyond just my own selfish, ego needs. And so I really loved that maybe Adventists could play a role in public society beyond, evangelism, and actually try to make a change in the world for the values that we had. So he was someone who, kind of had that vision always, and Spectrum always, he helped start the Center for Law and Public Policy, and really advocated for Adventists becoming lawyers in a way, not just to get a good job, but to actually try to make changes in society in a values driven way. So one thing I was going to say about that, one of the most successful Adventist Forum chapters, the San Diego Adventist Forum chapter, was one of these. There was a lot of, let's say, I'll use your term, concerned brethren tape ministries. And this was a progressive tape ministry that sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tapes. Their leadership has passed away, and they donated all those tapes to us. So those are recordings of Ray Cottrell, for instance, going and talking about things.
What were they called? Do you mind saying?
It was called the San Diego Adventist Forum. So
Right.
it was down in Southern
And
California.
they weren't concerned brethren.
No, they were us.
They were you guys.
Yeah. So they
Wow.
brought it.
They've got all these. You've got access to all these recordings.
So we're putting them all up on YouTube.
Awesome.
Yeah. So those are going to be available for anyone to listen to.
I'll be a pig in mud.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because that's where you have these kind of revolutionary, you can kind of go down memory lane. But I found, those to be and they used to have an audience in the hundreds. They would really talk about the things that were happening in the 80s and 90s, especially, and proposing really at the time, cutting edge ideas or background on what really happened when they were constructing the sanctuary doctrine for the fundamental beliefs book or that kind of thing. So,
and is the best place to go spectrummagazine.org?
Yeah, that's our presence on the web. We have over 2 million
YouTube channel as well.
Yeah,
sorry,
we have 2 YouTube channels. We have an old one that we've had since kind of the beginning of YouTube, and that's probably where you saw the Gil Valentine interview and some of those things. That's one of our big projects, is turning that YouTube site into a big resource. So right now I'm working with some scholars, but yeah, we'll develop out the video portion of that and make that accessible to folks.
And people can find YouTube from there as well.
Yep. We get over 2 million page views a year on that site. Wow. That's where we crank out, cutting edge investigative reporting that annoys some folks, but it's, we're award winning for that. We're working on a project with a major newspaper in the U.S. to do an investigation that we've done with a journalist into 3ABN, and we're going to continue to keep our eye on them. But that's going to come out in the secular press and on our website together in a couple of weeks.
So it's like 2024 is 1984 all over again. There was a lot of public press in the secular realms then, and you're helping to create that again. I think that's fantastic. I want to come back to Spectrum in a minute and talk a little bit about, and I have no idea why. I just, I do my shows, I hear feedback. We're getting 1,500 average a week messages on just the Facebook groups. I can't keep up with it, but every now and again I'll see a comment and someone wrote that Spectrum has sold out. I have no idea about that. So I want to chat to you about that. You probably get that kind of thing. Spectrum probably has since it started. As you said, you were raised in a family that had your Reformed Adventists and then the Reformed Adventists. So you're used to having a broad spectrum of critiques. I want to have a little chat about that and what you think some people mean by that. I want to just touch on Dez Ford before we leave the 80s, and why, because we've discussed this in a messenger off air, but why do you think Dez Ford has shaped Western Adventism more than any church administrator?
Yeah, because he was wronged, and it's pretty obvious to people who pay attention to the facts of that case. And, he became a cause célèbre. I think that his critique of the sanctuary doctrine has still not, the denomination has had to patch together a variety of attempts to explain things, but it just doesn't, if you pay attention, it just doesn't work. And so his genius was being a really great communicator, a really thoughtful person grounded in scholarship that could talk about what really matters, which is helping people understand what we would call the gospel in a way that encourages people and doesn't terrify them. And I'm oversimplifying that. Many people who are on this know that from personal experience. So I don't mean to say anything other than because the church has not actually been able to successfully defend the doctrine against the critique that he and many others have marshaled against it. He still lingers as that kind of unanswered question.
Yes.
Or the most recent and best articulation of that unanswered question, which is, why do we exist?
Yeah.
Now, there's other reasons that I think we exist. So let's maybe not try to justify it from Daniel and Revelation, and instead recognize that we exist, and maybe there's some more beneficial ways to do it than proclaim the three angels' messages. And I don't mean that's that I think let's think about what it means to express a kind of when you read histories of Adventism entering into a place, people are not like, wow, you explained what 1844 was, I didn't care. They say there's a kind of argument that's embedded in Adventism's Sabbatarianism that says, hey, if you put together these ways of thinking about, if you take the Bible seriously, then there's some arguments that we could make within the Bible about keeping the Sabbath. And I think that there might be some new ways to put together some ideas in the Bible. I think the Beatitudes, would be amazing if Adventism really reflected the Beatitudes and people thought, wow, what's the most Beatitude obeying, proclaiming, embodied denomination? Oh, they're the Adventists. Now that would be kind of an interesting way of maybe having a positive, not just a negative critique, but a positive step forward for the church. So that's why I think Dez Ford, because he was able to both critique but also create a new reality for a lot of people, which was very hopeful.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think you're right. A lot of change because of him theologically has happened at a grassroots level and then permeated up, and quite the opposite of the administrators top down trying to force things to happen and fit square pegs in round holes. I want to just touch back on to the Nostradamus Kid go ahead.
Before you had, I don't know if you wanted me to address both things, but you actually answered a question that you asked a question about if we've sold out, and I probably should.
I want to come back to that one if that's okay. Because I just want to do a little diversion and then come back with one more question, have a break, come back and answer that question.
Great. You know how to run a show, leave the exciting.
No, I don't. I just wing it every day. My life is just winging it.
I love it.
I'm having a ball though. I just wanted to touch on a couple of quick things because I can imagine that particular topic could lead to some other rabbit holes. The Nostradamus Kid, you've obviously got a creative mind. You've been involved also with movies and shorts, films and stuff. Can you tell us just a little bit about that as a little aside?
Yeah. I remember going to a meeting at the Loma Linda University Church before I was 10 years old. And probably, what was it? Maybe 6'5". It was very momentous. It was an afternoon thing. And my mom, the Lindy Chamberlain story and A Cry in the Dark. And that was this kind of pivotal moment where everyone was talking about a movie that we weren't supposed to watch, but had something to tell us about who we were through the eyes of, the world's, through the world's eyes. So that always was a part of me. I watched 5 Mile Creek as a kid. It was we didn't have a TV on in our own. My dad was teaching at the School of Nursing at Loma Linda. So we would go, he had a key. We'd go in, he'd wheel out one of those old AV wheeled things with a giant TV and a VCR. And we watched 39 episodes of 5 Mile Creek. It's where I fell in love. The first time I fell in love, Nicole Kidman as a curly-haired shepherdess in the great Australian Western by Disney. And so I've loved the way that you can get absorbed into the imaginative world of film. And while I was studying religion, I was very interested in hermeneutics. So then I started hanging out with the English department and thinking about literary criticism and thinking about how you apply, a feminist view or a post-structural view. You use those tools to unpack Shakespeare, for instance. Well, we also did that with Shakespeare in film class. And so we started to think about how do we read this film like a text? And then from there, I just became interested in film. So that's what I did some of my graduate work in, was thinking about religion and film and the ways, in fact, in the early silent era, there's a great book called The Silence of God, Silents, about the use of film in thousands of churches during the silent era. It was actually very useful for pastors back in the day. And so I've always been fascinated with that. And then because of some relationships that I have that I've maintained out of grad school, I've been able to work on producing some films, and had a film at the Sundance Film Festival that premiered the first weekend, that had 2 standing ovations, and won the Art of Change Award, the Special Art of Change Award. So very happy to do that. And there's a project that we're kind of starting to get moving, and if you don't mind, there's an Adventist that saved more than 1,000 Jews during World War II and other folks. And his name, he was a Dutch Adventist. He's honored by the Netherlands, honored by Israel, won the top awards for being a rescuer. And his name is Widener, and there's a Widener Foundation. Larry Garrity is one of the kind of founders of that. And my friend Ron Osborne has written a more popular book. There was a book in the 60s that came out called Flee the Captor that some folks here might have read about Widener. But this is a little bit more scholarly informed, but still gripping storytelling, and gets into his work later on hunting Nazis after World War II, and then opening up a health food store in California and sort of living a kind of anonymous pedestrian life after being, having this kind of heroic and in some ways tragic time during World War II. So anyway, thinking about how to maybe turn that into a film.
Wow.
That's kind of a project that I'm working with some folks on.
That's exciting. See, this is what we were talking about earlier, where you're 45 and you've done like 10 lifetimes worth of creative production and involvement. And good on you, because you can sense that you've got this passion for it as well. And that's what often drives you. Yeah.
I'll just keep, sending and receiving emails. That's basically what you have to do to get things done these days.
Oh, I love it. Barry Ford wrote, I'm Australian and I've never heard of 5 Mile Creek.
Oh,
I'm just trying to quickly bring it up on the screen here to
please.
to show you, to show Barry there. Oh, where is it?
Yeah, it's a Western based off a Louis L'Amour book that was set in the gold rush era in Australia.
I think this is
lots of fun stagecoaches.
Is this is the one? Is it? I'm just bringing up. Is that the one? 5 Mile Creek?
Yeah, it's a Disney thing. Yeah.
And I think that's why we may have seen it less over here, because it was Disney and not necessarily aired so much here. But go and check it out, Barry. You'll enjoy it. Okay, what we're going to do now. Oh, just one other quick question I wanted to cover. Actually, no, we'll leave that till the end. I want to ask you about why ideas matter. I want to talk a little bit about where Spectrum is growing today. We'll come back after the break with the big question. This sold out one. I'm not sure if you've got some questions, like when we did the promo post in the Facebook group. Boy, there's so many comments there, and I know you were engaging in that. Do you want to, in the break, just have a quick look to see if there's some there you want to maybe bring up onto the screen even, or just read out at least? And where we are right now, those watching in chat, I'm just going to quickly go question time. If you can cut and paste anything you've said prior to this comment that I've just put, that's where we're going to be reading from after the break. So if you've got something that you've written already earlier, cut and paste it, put it back in the chat, because I just can't keep up with all the chat. So we're going to have a short break. My very special guest today is Alexander Carpenter. We're having a refreshing, fun, informative conversation. I'm loving every second of it. And we will be right back after this short break. See you soon.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hi, and welcome back to SDAQ&A. My special guest today is Alexander Carpenter, and we're having a fantastic conversation about all things Adventist. And of course, he is executive editor and executive director of Spectrum. How long have you had that role, Alex?
The board brought me on. I was a member of the board, but I've been doing this for 3 years. Really great transition between Bonnie and me for about 6 months, where I started to build my team and kind of ease in as she was easing out. So I've been kind of hands on the wheel for 2.5 years here. We finished up a $1 million campaign, fundraising campaign.
Wow.
And I've brought in a bunch of youngsters who really are attracted to kind of making a difference, even as they all question, Adventist beliefs. They're, very much committed to a kind of inclusive Adventism. So they're really motivated by social values. So it's fun to kind of bring that energy here. And we're starting a 5-year strategic planning process to think about what we could look like by 2030.
I love that. And if we can help promote you guys, let me know anytime.
Thanks.
In that interview we chatted about earlier, where you were talking to Gil Valentine about the ostriches and canaries in 2022 on your Spectrum YouTube channel, the older one. I think Bonnie was asking questions in that as well. And Gil outlined the importance of leadership accepting Spectrum magazine, because he said it's both educational and a place of fellowship, or something. I'm paraphrasing. And I like that, because in many ways you're building a community, not unlike what we're trying to do here, where people can feel a sense of belonging. And I love that, because people coming to work for you or to contribute into the journal in whatever capacity they do, I'm getting a sense that they feel a sense of, hey, I belong to something. And it's so important, isn't it, to have a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So good on you. And I encourage people to go and subscribe there. SpectrumMagazine.org will send you to all the good places to do that. So we're going to just open up to some of the questions coming through, and I want to chat to you about this sold out allegation.
Yeah.
But just quickly before that, just talking about fundraising, I just wanted to thank people who've been making donations here in the last few weeks. I've had a few little projects of my own. If anyone's wanting to scan that QR code and make $1, just look, a few dollars really helps. I've had 3 projects, and 2 of the 3 have now been paid for. One was setting up a website, and look, thank
There we
you.
go. I'll chip in.
I appreciate that.
Of course.
One of them has been to build an actual website and host that for a year, and I needed $200 or $300 for that, and so that all came through. And I really appreciate people's donations that contributed to that. That really helped. And I'll just bring the link up. If people want to scan that QR code, you can find the website there. That's the SDAQ&A website. Very much a work in progress. I had to do all the artwork, so it's not that great. I see lots of creatives watching. That's a bit embarrassing, but it's a functional place for now. So that was one of the goals I had, and thank you. That has been I've been able to fund a year's worth of hosting for that. The second thing is Twitter now, or X. You have to pay to be what do they call it? Recognized. I can't remember. Or you can't go live.
Verified.
That's right, verified. And so that's going to cost, I think, I mentioned last week how much, and the funding came through for that. So thank you very much for that. And my third project that I'm just wanting to jump into now is providing more live gospel work into this channel, as well as my Voice Life Fellowship channel. And so that is... I'm needing, so I've got Restream for SDAQ&A, but I'm wanting to use StreamYard, so it's separate, so people can log into StreamYard, and that's going to cost me, I think, $400 or $500 a year. So that's my next little fundraiser, and I'd love to kind of do that in the next couple of weeks. If there's people out there that can just share a few dollars, it really, really helps. And there's also, I'll just quickly bring up my PayPal. If people don't have the scanning, or they're watching on their phones and can't scan, it's just paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. So of the 3, 2 are covered. Thank you, everyone. Covered in the last 2 weeks. And this last one now to get an account and subscription with StreamYard, which will really help me give access to different presenters and preachers. And they're going to do gospel programs both into here and into Voice Life Fellowship. So thank you, and thanks for your donation there, Alexander. It just popped up. I can see it on the on the screen down there. Thank you very much. In fact, one donation last week. I'm just wondering if I should mention names and amounts and whatnot. I've resisted doing that, but this particular lady paid the complete amount I needed to cover for the verification on Twitter. So thank you so much to that lady, and I'll ponder. Let me know in comments if people think I should name donate people who donate. Okay, so we're going to get to that complicated question, one that a few people raised, and I have no idea. As I said, please let me know about this idea of, some people have said Spectrum has sold out. What are they referring to? Do you know? And what's
I don't know exactly. I assume criticism comes for a variety of reasons. Sometimes folks see us too Adventist, especially when we're talking to a crowd of folks who are a Q&A crowd rather than a just tell me what to believe crowd. And so I think some folks see us as why am I still an Adventist? Is he kind of like drinking too much of the Kool-Aid? Is he less of a canary and more of an ostrich, to use Gil Valentine's metaphors? And that applies to Spectrum. I think also often there's waves of folks who criticize Adventism, starting from deep into the pre-denomination levels, where folks realize there's some exaggerations about Ellen White's inspirational gifts or recognition of how she used history non-academically. That creates folks who say, this is definitely not for me, and if you're still in it, you're deluded. And that's fair. Spectrum has always tread a line of sort of the loyal opposition, and by that, not loyal to a leader or the church as a structure, but loyal to an idea, which is, we believe that when, that there's a kind of set of values in a historically informed, better hermeneutical practice that would take something and improve it. And so some folk can feel like that we're compromised because we're still insisting that the system has value, and that every political movement has folks who are just a little who are part of it, who are to the left or the right or out in another galaxy. It's just the way that organizations operate. So there's always folks on our on each side that see us as, how in the world can they operate that way? And that often happens with people who are more critical of Ellen White, particularly. And I think it's really interesting to see Spectrum's history there. By the way, we published, we're the people who published the Bible Conference document.
What year did that come out?
That came out in May 1979.
See, that was huge when that came out. This is the thing. I think no matter what criticism people can make of any, like I get criticized all the time. There's anything you do in a public forum, you're going to get criticized, and that's fine, But overall, you've got to look at the overarching, what's going on here. And I think you have created, as I said, that Gil had said, an educational platform, journalistic works going, where you are actually uncovering at every point of Adventist history. You've written about it, or you've covered it when it was unfolding or soon after.
It's not glamorous.
that is a good thing. And regardless of criticisms that can ebb and flow through that, the overarching is great. And as Gil said, you're also building fellowship within that community.
Yeah.
I've just had 2 messages. Someone said, this is just private messages, they didn't want to say it publicly. One was about that somehow the church leadership has actually taken a level of control within the organization as far as on a committee or something like that.
No.
So that's good to clear that one up. And the other one,
we are recently, Ted Wilson has not allowed any church GC, like the communication department, just they used to reply to like basic, like we send them, hey, we're doing a report on, the Adventist Review. Some guy faked his multiple degrees for a long time and used Adventist World Radio computers to mine for Bitcoin, which he gave to some church leaders. And we're just like, hey, we're doing a story like any journalist does, good journalism. We practice. There's 2 things that we practice that doesn't exist in a lot of Adventism that are professional ethical practices. One, when we don't if we write about an entity, we reach out to them for comment and give them a chance to answer their critics.
Yeah, of course.
Print.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we do is we really are grounded in scholarship, and that makes us not as sometimes as sexy as the critic of the day or the kind of charismatic pastor who's kind of sick of the whole thing and rebelling. So in that way, we can kind of seem a little, you're like, okay, you wrote a article with 40 footnotes. That's not as sexy as just saying to hell with it all.
Yeah.
But we do that hard work, and we have a long history of lots of Adventists who appreciate that. We don't go for the easy snark. We go for a kind of serious, critical engagement.
Yeah, and lots of fact checking.
Yes.
And the other thing I'll just read out that they said, and I'm not sure if it was AT or Spectrum, but there was some dialogue entered into with Steve Daly about his book, where I think was it Alden Thompson? I might have the name wrong. I interviewed him on my show in season 2.
Great. Alden's great.
Alden, yeah, it is Alden. Is it Thompson? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he had written a critique on it. Steve had answered it, but then somehow things were taken down. That was the other question. I think it was Spectrum. Is that right?
The history I know there is that Jonathan Butler, historian with a PhD from University of Chicago, and kind of in that Gil Valentine, Larry Garrity circle.
Ron Grable.
Yeah, exactly. Wrote a kind of nice long form review of Steve Daly's criticism of Ellen White. It's funny that we're seen as too mainstream on something like that, because literally the Spectrum crowd did the raw numbers. Prophet is of health, he's our guy, and we've published so many articles raising questions about who Ellen White is, at the same time not abandoning her, recognizing. I mean, we just formed a new Eric Anderson, retired president of Southwestern Adventist University and interim president at PUC, longtime historian, a calm guy. We brought together Niels Erik Andreasen, George Knight, and a bunch of other scholars to talk about Ellen White. We released a statement criticizing the church's use of her.
Yeah, I read that
in October, November. That's becoming a book, by the way. And it's going to be, it's serious, but it was, in fact, it was a little tame even for me, but I was part of it, because we have to think strategically about where we go. It's very easy for church leaders to find a way to dismiss criticism if they can just make it look like it's just some folks with, sour grapes.
Yes,
and so
yes.
we remain, we take, that's one reason I remain an Adventist, is because I want my critique to land. I want it to make a difference. And Steve Daly has two issues there. One, his critique is too easily pushed away, in part because, and two, just in terms of scholarship, he gets very speculative. Whenever you're talking about someone's psyche, one of my colleagues at PUC, we were probably trying to psychoanalyze Ted Wilson, and he has plenty of, he's not a fan, but he reminded us, because he has a PhD in psychology, reminded us that, if you're doing that, there's a professional practice of diagnosing someone's mental illness. And as fun as it is around the kitchen table or in an office, it's essentially meaninless. And real, if we're serious about trying to figure out how someone operates, we have to recognize that there's ways to do it that require an approach and a system, and most importantly, a way. We have to do it in ways that absorb critique. And what happened there with Steve Daly is he wrote to Spectrum. This is before I took over, right before I took over, and said, "Okay, you just published Butler's critique of my book. Some praise, some critique. I want to respond." And so Bonnie said, "Sure, you can write the New Yorker, the Atlantic, all these publications, great." But he wanted to write the same amount of words in response, which no publication does. He has his own outlets to publicize his response. And so then he got really mad. And actually, it was the first negative interaction I had when I took over. He reached out to me, kind of the new guy, and said, "All right, you need to do this." And I said, "No." And then he took my private communication with him. I learned a lesson there, where I was just going back and forth, and published it all without asking me for permission on his site. And there's a little ending there. One of the people who was following him reached out and said, "Well, was kind of upset at me." And so I explained our approach, grounded in a kind of professional practice. And that person actually subscribed to Spectrum after I kind of explained who we are and why we do what we do. We're open to that critique. We read those books, we engage it. But, just because you write a book doesn't mean that you have the last word on who Ellen White was. I go to scholarly meetings every year, and it's not always fun, but those guys stand there and present a paper, and their fun, exciting idea that their wife, gave them some kudos for, can get shot down in a room of scholars. And sometimes it's because there's some factual evidence missing, or they didn't make a logical argument clear enough. And so that's the kind of real world that we live in, is we're always in a community, always, checking my weird idea, make sure that other people who have spent time thinking about 19th century Christianity, Victorian mores, how people wrote books back in the day, the genre of the life of Christ, kind of fictional biography that was so hot when Ellen White was writing Desire of Ages, and how she copied that style. Those sort of things are just the stuff that we really get excited about, is really understanding things in their historical context.
It's interesting. I interviewed both John Butler and Ron Numbers on the same show. They were both on with me. And when we did, because in his latest, before he died, the third edition, I think, he and his partner did a bit of a psychoanalysis in there of Ellen as well.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about it, I got so much pushback for trying, and they were criticizing the three of us, John as well, and Ron, for speculating on her mental health.
Yeah.
And they are very funny guys. The three of us were.
Yeah.
Like
They're a great sense of humor.
There's a pre-interview that I'd videoed and shared somewhere on one of the platforms, and we're just cracking up. And so, but it's obviously a sensitive topic. I would love to have John and Steve on, or Alden and Steve Daly on, Alden Thompson, just to have them chat a bit about why they disagree with each other and what their upsets are. Because Steve Daly certainly encourages, by his approach, very interesting conversations. Two or three of his interviews I've done with him are in the top 10 of 300 interviews that I've done. So there's people super interested. In fact, he's on next week or the week after. So yeah, I might try and organize a debate with one of those two.
A guy that we've published who's he's more provocative than some of those scholars, but he is Don Casebolt. He's written a couple of books. Have you interviewed him?
Not yet. I've reached out, and if he's watching today, please come on the show. And if you could put a good word in for me, I'd love it.
Yeah, he's got a interesting.
2 of his books.
He has read so much from the 1840s and 50s that I joke around with him that he writes like he's from that era.
Yeah, he does.
But he's got an interesting. He's got his argument is a little nuanced. He uses the term confabulation when talking about how Ellen White operated. And so I'd invite folks to kind of dig into that and see if they find that a helpful device for a helpful frame of mind and a tool for unpacking the way that she worked. And he's great at just reminding us that Ellen White was a teenager. She was terrified by William Miller and awestruck. And then she started hanging out with other people in this culture of sort of performative prophetic utterances. And, like any teenager does, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll start doing that sort of thing. And he does a really good job, I think, of helping us understand that early Ellen White. But it's really important to recognize Ellen White. There's multiple Ellen Whites within her journey. And like all of us do, we kind of maybe she looked back on her early writings, so to speak. And, there's things that she didn't continue doing later in life and didn't promote as much. So there's a kind of, there's an arc to who she was that is always important to remember.
Yeah. I think for me, just on a personal level, and I don't in any way judge or say people should leave the Adventist church. But for me, when I thought, hang on, particularly around that food for worms and 2 or 3 other visions that didn't come true, and then to say, well, it was conditional. Well, if it's conditional, that's saying also last generation theology is at play. So you're either going to go, it's conditional and you condone last generation theology, or you're adding a condition in to try and reverse engineer something that didn't happen and kind of go, oh, it didn't happen because of this. But to me, that put her in that position of false prophet. And I then couldn't put my name to it. And I read a lot of these guys, and I think you guys know way more than me. You know this, Ellen White. I struggle with how do they stay, But that's a balance I have. On the one hand, I'm going, how can they stay? On the other hand, I go, boy, it's so fascinating. This is interesting. I love that they're staying and providing this great information. But yeah, that's just for me. Let's look at some of these questions that are coming through, and we'll see how many we can get through. I'll read a couple, and then I'll go to you to answer some that you've seen maybe. Have you got some there that you'd like to comment on that you'd seen?
Sure.
As well? Cool. Okay, so if you get those ready. First one, What are Alexander's tips for growing a great mustache?
Well, number one, encouragement from your wife. That's important. It used to be kind of down all the way here, and I trimmed it back. But she loved me with a mustache, so I shaved it off during the dark days of the pandemic when she was away out of the house, and she returned and really let me know that I had become hard to look at, and I realized my marriage was in danger if I didn't grow this thing back.
That's classic. Oh dear. Oh, from a fun question to a very deep question, Motor Sapien asks Alexander, how would you define the gospel?
It's the central message of Jesus, and I think it is perhaps, I mean, there's just so many people who have talked about this, so there's maybe, this is how I'll do it in a very simplified way. If I was writing about it, I would add in a lot of nuance and quote from important people, and I do think that Dez Ford was really helpful in freeing people from the idea that salvation is not freely available to everyone who wants it, and there's, I don't believe that there's an investigative judgment. I don't believe that it's conditional. It's really based on our relationship with Jesus and our sense that there's not just forgiveness for sin. I want to push beyond that kind of evangelical. That is an important part of it. But I do think that it also involves seeing how Jesus lived and talked. And I think, as I've mentioned before, the Beatitudes, the sermon that Jesus presented at the beginning of his ministry that talked about caring for the poor and recognizing that the people that we think are first are really last in the mind of God, and the people who we think of as below us, people that we disagree with, we always have to check our assumptions, because as I said before, if we really believe that God is infinite, I don't think of God as in human form. If we really recognize that we live in an infinite universe, as science tells us, and that these galaxies are impossible for us to really understand, that there's worlds out there, and that we're just, it's the fact that we're having a conversation, Peter, and that we can, exchange ideas in a universe that operates at a level that we can't even comprehend, humbles me. And it's why I care about when Jesus talks about being the way, the truth, and the life. I really think about those words. The way, it's a path, it's following, it's a relationship, not just with Jesus, but with each other. I saw Chris Smoot, who was the country director for ADRA Bangladesh. I went there when I was 19, volunteered. And he actually did a worship talk on this, because he was talking about James and was talking about, that's the book that Luther didn't like, in part because it talks about works. Now, I don't believe that we're saved by works at all. But I do think that works matter, or things that we do in this life matter, not in a salvational way, but I think they matter in other people's salvation, because who we represent, if we really believe that we're representatives for Christ as Christians, then that can affect other people. So I do take both the vertical, pointing to God through Jesus, and then also the horizontal, thinking about who's around us. So that cross is really the key to understanding what the gospel is for me. So we could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
No, that's good. That's good. And
There's probably
David
some heresy in there somewhere.
gave it some Pharisee. Dave 12:21 says Jesus is the Christ, the truth is the way, the truth, and life, which is what you were saying as well there.
Yeah, and I want to say truth. Yeah, I could have gone on that, but truth embodied. I love there in John where you have Pilate looking at Jesus and saying, "What is the truth?" And you have like the embodiment of truth, which is not a doctrine, but a person, a divine being, somebody who's leading people to a new type of consciousness. So, yeah, I'll add that in there just because it's such a profound moment in history.
Talking about that kind of being in awe of the universe, I was watching a show the other night, well, maybe a year ago, and it was saying, so we've got our Milky Way galaxy, and there's trillions of galaxies, and then there's clusters of galaxies. So you can see what looks like just a bright shining thing, and it's clusters of trillions of galaxies.
Yeah.
And then there are trillions of clusters of galaxies. And you just start to go, that I just can't even comprehend it, but I'm in awe of it. And I think for those who try and begin to say they know it all, they're going to have some struggle. They're going to struggle. Motor Sapien says, Alexander, what years were you at PUC and what did you teach?
Thanks. I would drive up from Berkeley and teach as an adjunct, and then they hired me full-time starting in 2008, 9, 10, and I taught there for 6 years full-time. And then I have been an adjunct on and off since. And now they asked me to come and teach this winter quarter, and I'm really kind of focused on Spectrum these days. But I go up there and do lectures. I'm going to do a lecture at Southern for their journalism program in October.
That's great.
Yeah.
MC writes, he just reminded me that he played, I don't know if MC wants me to say his name or not. I'll keep it private in case he doesn't. Shoot me a message, MC. But he says, hey, Peter and I did a song called Down by the Riverside. We had a jam at Steve Daly's church. That's what he's referring to.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I went to the church while I was there at the former Adventist Fellowship. It's literally down the road a few minutes. And so Steve invited me. And Steve Daly is a fabulous person, like a really nice guy. He's a gentle giant. He's like way taller than I expected, very athletic. And he's got a beautiful church with wonderful pastoral care. And it was so interesting to see the side of him that is not the side involved with the turbulence, seeing him actually with his pastoral care in motion, and we had a lovely, lunch and afternoon there. But MC and I were jamming after the program, and I think MC, we called it the SDA Riverside Blues.
Nice.
So we'll have to release that at some point.
This is one of the things that I try to obey, but you obviously have had good encounters with Steve, and it's always important to recognize that we can't define people by our few moments of reading emails or having a conversation or hearing maybe they use the wrong words to define a doctrine. There's just so much nuance to who people are, and some of the worst people can be the kindest people in other contexts. So try to always remember that.
I run a business in a nearby town 20 minutes away from here, and I've got a building there right by cafe culture and the lake and everything, and I love it. I go a couple of times a week, and it's my business. I run it, but we were doing, and I do a weekly program there. And anyway, there was one person there who was a huge vax supporter, and another person there, huge anti-vax. And it kind of, I didn't realize, because I was good friends with both of them. And it was starting to split the little group we've got there of 30 or 40 people, and totally forgetting. I just invited a few people for lunch at one of the cafes, and both of them came not knowing that each of them would be there. But we discovered you can put aside some of these things and enjoy each other's company and find common ground. And now every Monday night they both come to my little fellowship group, and we don't talk about vax or anti-vax, but we just get on well and have a good time. I'm not saying that those things aren't significant and shouldn't be addressed, but I'm saying I think there's room for seeing, the value in humans. It's a bit of a bell curve. Some people you've got to delete and block.
Yep, I've been there myself.
Yeah. Sherry writes, Alex, are the SDA top folks trying to get away from Martin Luther? My minister claimed that forensic justification is probably wrong.
Number one, I can't. I think there's there. I think the sanctuary doctrine in Adventism has made it hard for Adventists to really echo the sort of historic Luther clarion call about justification of faith, which itself was a reaction to the Christianity at the time. But I also think that there's lots of other important critiques of Luther that are not just driven by sort of authoritarian Adventist leadership or close-minded fundamentalism in Adventism, that I think are just helpful. I'm very, reading about the open view of God. Rick Rice and a lot of evangelicals critique the sovereign view of God, which Luther has, and a lot of the Reformed churches have, this sort of unmoved mover, Aristotelian kind of concept of the divine, and they recognize a more process-oriented. I'm editing an article right now by Chuck Scriven, where he really points out that the verses in the Bible where God, including when God defines God's self to Moses, we used to say, we interpret that the Hebrew is I am who I am, but it's really I will be who I will be. And there's other evidences. In fact, Jack Miles' book, God, a Biography, which I recommend, is a great example of thinking about the movement of this group of this tribe who have this history that they're trying to understand. They're writing this history or editing this history and thinking about where they've been, the stories they've been told, and trying to understand how, if this God is such a great God, why they're captives in Babylon. And then the story continues. But it's really important to recognize that when we're talking about, justification by faith, core to Protestantism, but also needs to be updated, and we need to think about it. It's very important to maybe throw away some of the other things that came along with that, which is, for Martin Luther, anti-Semitism.
Yeah, he wrote a whole book on that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of ego, solipsism, individualism that comes along with that I think narrows down the big expansive gospel that Jesus is representing, which is not just about a kind of individual salvation by faith, but a recognition of how a person should then follow in the footsteps of Jesus beyond that.
Someone's just written to me. Is it gone? Oh, yeah. Earlier, did you say that Ted Wilson has said to their PR public relations group,
yeah,
that
they can't answer
not to reply to you?
Yeah.
That's a regime. That's fascism right there.
They're
How did that
scared.
make?
I mean, we're doing serious journalism these days. Like, look at the thing we just did on Iceland. And
Yes.
the thing is, I see the cracks in that. Not everyone at Ted Wilson's level agrees with Ted, and there's people who recognize that his kind of walled off, no communication. At least his father would like get mad at Spectrum and publicly denounce us.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
dialogue, and we could defend our
dialogue.
But
yes.
he is afraid because he can be a nice person in life. I did a Sabbath school with his nephew Matthew Vollmer, who's just a fantastic writer, who's Episcopalian, by the way.
Right.
And he tells great stories about Uncle Ted, and
Yeah.
He's mystified by him in some ways, but he's a fine uncle. He's not a jerk as an uncle.
No,
So
yeah.
I want to recognize that and give him those props. He hasn't like defrauded the church and run off with the money or done things like that.
No.
So I want to recognize those sort of things. But he's cunning, he's political, he's vindictive.
Right. Yeah.
And that's and that when you're like that, there's a long history of those folks actually, because they freeze the church so much, it becomes fragile. And I think the cracks are starting to appear there, because he just won't allow any critique, any serious critique of the doctrines, and many of those need to be rethought.
Yes. Yeah. That's another question I want to finish on, actually, with that. Sure. We'll unpack that a bit more. You have had a lot to do with support of women's ordination, women in ministry. This is another message from someone privately. Can you unpack a little bit of your involvement with that, and how Spectrum has been involved with that too?
Yeah, actually, Spectrum, back in the 70s, there was the Mohaven Conference in Ohio in 72, 73. And Spectrum, many of our, supporters and founders were part of that. So, and then Roy actually created the ordination that happened in, I think, 1995 at the Sligo Church, where they ordained 4 women locally. That grew out of the Sabbath school that Roy Branson taught. And he said, hey, let's do our own thing. Who cares what they say? And so they worked with the pastoral leadership, and that's how Kendra Holoviak Valentine was ordained there. Norma Osborne was ordained there. So that's, credit to them. And that's pure Spectrum here. There's some folks in there, how can you say you don't believe in the investigative judgment? Are you afraid people are going to come after you? I mean, please, number one, I'm here in California. My membership is hidden away in a church. So I really take advantage, and we have to recognize that we have a system where we can say things, and
freedom of speech
at the local level. That's where that power is. So let's use that. Let's not be afraid. So that's what I just stand on the shoulders of those giants. Love, support women's ordination, support our LGBTQ Adventists. We're publishing a book that the Germans did, a bunch of German scholars did, called Queer Insights. That's going to be coming out in October, basically a translation of that. That's getting some of them into trouble. We continue to try to enlarge the borders of this community. And I'm glad you have Harvey coming on, because
I was literally going to
about that.
Yeah. I was literally going to say, because it's interesting with Harvey, who's watching now and is on tomorrow. He's my guest tomorrow. There's a side of his experience that you would greatly support. And then I noticed in the comments there was a back and forth about the cult.
He was
stuff.
mystified that I would still be a member of a cult.
And so I want to come to that now. And if you could bring up some of that if you've got that close to hand. But just
Yeah.
before we do, I'm just going to segue into that with someone who may be a relative of yours, the Andy Mack, and she's been on the program as well, which I really enjoyed. She mentioned earlier something about a boat trip into Avondale. Is that your relative?
That was that book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's so. You are related.
Oh, yeah. Great.
So
Nice to meet you. We need to
Isn't
connect
it
on
fun?
Facebook and let's
That'd
see.
be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she said, Alexander, from your perspective inside the church, does the Adventist movement have cult-like tendencies, or is it free of all that? That segues into your conversation you were having with Harvey. Can you unpack a little bit of that for us?
That's one of the the history there is really important, because cult, that use of the word really became a thing in the 1950s, as there was a kind of popular fascination with all kinds of religious phenomenon that got called cults. And of course, we can think about that certainly in the 60s, where there was a lot of religious experimentation, and you had people preying on other people in cult situations. So when you had Walter Martin leveling that critique as sort of a cult attacker on Adventists, the church leaders really took that seriously. That's why we have questions on doctrine, an attempt to kind of discuss that. Edward Steppen, anyway, I'm getting tired here, but anyway, Gil Valentine just wrote an article about, Steppenwall. We published an article about him kind of responding to that critique, because in the evangelical mind, if you don't have a really clear gospel, then you're creating a kind of dangerous situation for your members. It's heretical, but also manipulative, right? If you're kind of saying you have to do these sort of things to be saved, then you're kind of taking the place of God. And that, there's a long line of cult leaders doing that. So I just want to recognize that history here. The reason, so I'll say that there probably are cultic experiences in Adventism, potentially in some churches. Maybe there's some pastors who are manipulative. Maybe there's some self-supporting compounds where people really are controlled, and they live in fear. So I absolutely know those have existed, and
like the David Koresh kind of thing.
Yeah. No doubt there. Let's call it a cult. That is a cult. That was. By the way, I was there at Baylor University for a history conference, and I went with two buddies of mine to the compound, and we were arguing over whether they worship on Saturday or Sunday, and one of the people there didn't have a good answer for us, so they recommended we talk to their new leader. So we went to the new leader's house, very dramatically in a wheelchair, missing one leg and one eye opposite from diabetes. And he regaled us for an hour with just incredible speculative theology, just pulled out, like internally logical, but predicated on premises that were just the most incredible imagination, text here and there strung together in ways that were a little too similar to some Adventist books.
I've had a few chats like that.
But why I don't think that the Adventism that I experience, and as much as we critique Ted Wilson, I don't see him as a cultic leader, is just because the kind of characteristics of a cult, you can actually, and I know this didn't feel like it in the past, but there's plenty of space in spaces of Adventism where people can raise questions and think for themselves if they want to take that opportunity and maintain a kind of healthy relationship to the church. Now, it's hard for lots of people, and I don't, I in no way want to say that it's easy for folks. It hasn't been easy before, because I have family, I have friends who have said goodbye, and I understand why, and I completely support them. But cult is a very serious thing, and there's some characteristics that just don't apply to Adventism, and we just don't have that kind of devotion to a leader. Now, there are people who are devoted to leaders in Adventism that acts in a cultic way, but there is a I'll be at the American Academy of Religion, and they do not treat Adventism as a cult. I was in graduate school at the Graduate Theological Union with folks from all the Protestant denominations. There's a Lutheran school there. There's a Presbyterian school that I went to. And Adventism was just another religious partner in those conversations. One of my professors, my major professor was a Catholic priest. And, the thing is that you could make, there's kind of weird things in religion that we can recognize as problematic, but if we're going to level, there's just in the lived reality of Adventism in much of the world, there are plenty of problems, but there's not the kind of mind control, body control, manipulation at a mass level that is outside of the mainstream of, you could say, the way that lots of social phenomenon happen that people belong to. I mean, you could argue that there's a lot of music fan groups that operate like cults. Their favorite singer can do no wrong, even if they have done bad things.
Yeah.
So we just have to recognize that that other religions don't treat other religious scholars recognize Adventism as a legitimate new American, is what we're often categorized, a new American religion, and it's so the kind of internal ex-Adventist critique of cult needs to take that critique to other scholars and see outside of Adventism and see how they buy it as well. It's not just an Adventist conversation.
We're getting so many questions that they're actually bumping off the top, and I can see these good questions disappearing. So I just want to, it's really going nuts. You can probably see them just bumping up. And I'm trying to work out how to do super chat, because that guarantees you get what you want to say on the screen. Okay. I do want to just bring up this one because it dropped off, and another one that actually, if everyone just stops commenting for a second, there's a couple of really good questions I want to come to, and it's going to bump them off. If people don't mind, just pause for a second, because I've got no way of going back up and bringing them back.
I'm trying to look for the one where somebody said Alex is an idiot. That was my favorite one.
Oh, really? Yeah, look, believe me, I get that too. One guy called me a tool of Satan. I said, "Stop being such a baby." And he said, "Oh, how dare you make such an ad hominem attack on me?" And I said, "Dude, you called me tool of Satan. I just said you're a baby. What's?" And he kind of did agree. That was a bit, yeah. So just a couple of quick things. Sherry just said, so can you just expand on what you were saying earlier about Martin Luther? Do you think
Oh.
SDAs are rejecting Martin Luther now?
There's probably something, a phenomenon that I'm not aware of. I do think that a lot of mainstream Adventist teaching at various points, I think, certainly lost sight of justification by faith. So if that's what she's talking about, I absolutely think that the kind of last generation theology conversation that we see in some quarters of Adventism, including GYC, they're missing the justification by faith core of the gospel. But beyond that, I can think of some professors at the seminary who absolutely are very, Lutheran in their approach. And I think the Adventist Church itself has done some, back in the day at least, had some programs to really join. I think William Johnson, a son of Australia, was part of some of those conversations with the Lutherans to create a kind of dialogue. So beyond that, I don't know.
He, on my show in season 2, it was the first interview of season 2, and I said to him, I don't know if you saw this interview. If you haven't, you might want to go and check it out, because it kind of encapsulates everything SDAQ&A is. I said to him, how confident are you that something supernatural happened October 22, 1844? And there's this long pause. And then he said, after about 15 seconds, I don't think I can answer that. I don't know how I can answer that. And I thought, boy, that's revealing. And later on, I said, so do you think you can be an Adventist and not believe in 1844, or that Ellen's prophecy was, or her confirmative follow-up prophecies are wrong? And he was like, yeah, sure. That kind of leans into this question that is it Rochelle or Rachel? I'm not sure. I'm curious where Alexander draws the line for himself of how much SDA theology he feels he can disagree with and still consider himself SDA.
I won't answer that like my friend William Johnson did, kind of hedging there. I encourage folks in the church to be very vocal about what doctrines they disagree with. I think we need more public openness about those. And I'm going to print a critique of the 24th fundamental belief, the sanctuary, in the next issue of the journal by Warren Trenchard, who is a New Testament scholar with a PhD from the University of Chicago. And this is what I tasked him to, we kind of did this together. He looks at the text of the belief and the texts, how they have the little proof text at the bottom. And the article is just him going clause by clause through the belief, critiquing it. And then, because he's a scholar of the Bible and pedantic, he goes through each of those texts and show how they're out of context. So I want to just emphasize that I take doctrine seriously, so seriously that we have to recognize that these beliefs need engagement from folks, even if we think that they are false.
Yeah.
Number one, that it can tell us more about this thing that we were born into or have been a part of. And I think we need to recognize that the church isn't as powerful as we think, and it can't operate the way it has operated in the past, in part because it's so big. What happened to Dez Ford was such a stupid political mistake by Elder Wilson. He kind of won the battle but lost the war there.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so important for us to go through and critique. I mean, I think all the Adventist beliefs need constant critique. And I say that as someone who takes several of them very seriously. In fact, I was once part of a little youth movement. We had a conference in 1999, and we formed a committee to construct a new belief, because there's the word love and like loving each other is not in any of the fundamental beliefs. So we proposed a belief. That was when there was only 27. And I think, number one, just kind of numbering beliefs is absurd when you think about human, how beliefs actually operate. Few people can actually name them all. So why are we even scared about them? I mean, they just hover out there as this sort of law that can be used against us if somebody wants to enforce them. But the reality is there's actually more power among the people than with the leadership. So I think it's important for us to really think about those beliefs, take them seriously. That was a failure. We tried to construct a new belief, and it did not succeed, but it was at least an attempt to make something. Kierkegaard talks about I want to believe. I want a truth that's true for me, is what he says. And I think it's important for us, however we do it, to actually only believe what we believe, and not just believe it because we're supposed to, or we feel like there's social pressure or political pressure. The best thing, that's what I tell my students, is they kind of wonder, how do you remain Adventist? As I said, the best thing you can do is tear away the beliefs that you can't believe, and then create beliefs that you want to believe, and only construct beliefs that you will actually hold yourself accountable to. And if we do that, I think that's an interesting kind of conversation for us to have.
And that's where it becomes a personal thing, because for you, it's different how you take that information. Like for me, I had to go, I can't stay anymore. Can't put my name to that. Yeah. But there's many different ways of perceiving that. Hey, Motor Sapiens question bumped off the screen, but he often talks about this guy. I'll bring it onto the screen because you guys did a really great. This is Remembering Graham Maxwell.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's a Spectrum article. There's a couple of Grahams I've discovered. So, Motor Sapien, if you're watching, is this the guy that you keep referring to? I'm pretty sure it is. Just let me know, because I'm just interested if Alexander could just comment if he remembers anything about Graham.
I do. I remember sitting in a Theology 101 class and being warned. We were learning about soteriology, and Graham Maxwell was the moral influence theory guy, Southern California. I was at, Holy Berrien Springs, Michigan. And so the professor was letting us know that was a slippery slope and we needed to stick to the penal substitutionary theory of the atonement. Anyway, I know that Graham Maxwell has helped a lot of people not be afraid of God, because he emphasized always that Jesus functions as an advocate, and in fact, Jesus is God, so God's an advocate, and really just helped some of those really problematic metaphors that were part of Adventism. He really helped folks retain faith, keep a healthy Christianity, and find a Jesus that was a friend, as he said. We're not servants, we're friends with Jesus, and then that Jesus called us to a life of attention to others.
Yeah, well, that's good, and hopefully, Motor Sapien, that is the one. And that link that I posted, if people look it up on Spectrum, it's got some fantastic videos there of Graham Maxwell, and I listened to a few last week, and boy, they are really good. Did he ever address the stand without an intercessor thing, or does he just more focus on the good stuff of Adventism and just ignore the shut door and the scandal?
There's probably 1,000 Adventists who know the answer to that, and I don't.
Yeah.
He really had a loyal following. There's a wing of Spectrumites who really come to Spectrum via him and Jack Pravancha and some of that crowd.
Yes, and he mentioned DUBA. What's the last name? How do you pronounce? Moto Sapien mentioned him earlier. David Dubia or Dubia? I'm not sure, but he Maxwell Pravancha. I wonder if you can to raise up some questions that you might have got there from Graham Fraunfelder or Debbie Hooper. They were in the comments in the promo. If you have any,
Graham asked a couple of things.
They had some good ones, and Debbie Hooper also. She writes a lot for AT, and I'm not sure if you've had her write anything for you guys, but if you ever need a very insightful,
good
journalist, I'd be contacting her if I was.
See, Graham. He said. I think one of his questions was, how did I become an Australian citizen? And that's because of my mother. She just, even though she was in the U.S., she was kept her Australian citizenship and then gave it to all of her 4 sons. So as a gift, one Christmas.
Nice. But just a quick interruption. MC asked before about those recordings. He must have missed the first part. MC, they will be coming on the Spectrum website, so that's exciting.
This fall.
Okay, good. Is Autumn Council on soon?
It's going to be the second weekend of October.
And you'll be reporting on that?
Yes, we'll be reporting every day on that.
A couple more from Graham, if you've got any there in front of you, and then a couple you can find from Debbie Hooper.
Okay, sure. Let me see here.
And I'll just scroll down my list as well. While you're looking there, Stephen Beagle says SDAQ&A is educational for me. That's great. Thank you, Stephen. Ray, Adventists are dogs. The Apostle Paul didn't care about the sensitive feelings of evildoers. Paul called the mutilators of the flesh dogs. Adventists are annoying dogs barking at the church.
I've got one from Graham I think could be interesting.
Yep, share.
Yeah, so he has he got hammered by church admin about things and how has he dealt with it. So when I was in grad school, I was in the Bay Area. It was kind of the early days of blogging. And so I reached out to Spectrum and said, hey, you guys should have a blog. And they said, well, why don't you create it? And so I started the Spectrum blog.
Oh, wow. So that's how you kind of got into it.
Yeah. And so I did that. Then I was hired by PUC. Dick Osborne was the president. And then he left, and then we had a new president, and that president was, not that great. And I'm happy saying that because she just was so insecure that once she called me and 2 other faculty, legendary people, Alvin Fulton, Greg Schneider, and sat us down in the boardroom and held up a bunch of letters that she had gotten complaining about us and said, see what I have to deal with, and threw them down on the table in front of us. When I was going to get married, there was an administrator who is great. And I invited her to my wedding. My wife has Peruvian heritage. So of course we were going to have dancing at our wedding. We love music. And so my wife is super smart. So we got to get all these Adventists out on the dance floor. So there was a thing on the RSVP. If you play this song, I will dance. So we got everyone to submit songs, their favorite songs. And our dance floor was rocking. I mean, full. Number one, my dad, lifelong Adventist, after his divorce, took up salsa dancing, and he's an incredible dancer himself. So very proud of him. Played bass in praise music bands. Shout out to our musicians.
It's awesome.
So anyway, I got back and I found this favorite administrator wasn't able to go, and I asked her why, and she said that the president had forbid her from going because we were going to have dancing, and I knew then I was in trouble. And she called me in and basically the president harangued me about my support for LGBTQ students. Some things that we had posted on the website just showing that Adventists there was this phenomenon called the Harlem Shake where everyone was doing this very weird kind of video meme thing in the early days. And of course, I didn't just do PUC because it was happening at Walla Walla, Southern, Andrews, even Montemorelos in Mexico. We had a video of the students doing it. But because we put them all together because it was a phenomenon, but it just shocked Advent.
I'd love to see that.
See, it was. So she was very mad about that, but I taught over 1,500 students there. My last year, the seniors asked me to be their speaker for the senior dedication chapel, and then I gave a speech about the president. I did a speech called "The Individual and the Institution," and I talked about how she was shutting down the very core, the heart of academia by not even a thoughtful kind of coherent fundamentalism, but just a fear reaction. And then, she got the school into major debt, and the entire faculty asked her to leave. And then the board finally behaved, and now she's leading a academy, non-Adventist academy. So I just want to point that out that yes, I have had administrators, really try to use their power to silence what I do and what Spectrum represents. And I always, when I was growing up, I'd sit there on Sabbath afternoon and I hear everyone kind of say what they really thought, but they didn't say it at church.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be I wanted to see if there was a space in Adventism to really say what we think and still be part of the community. So,
which Spectrum is, isn't it? And I liked, as I said earlier, what Gil Valentine said. It's educational and a fellowship place.
Yes,
it's almost like Spectrum. Spectrum is a church within a church, and all your forum chapters are your little mini churches around the globe.
Yeah.
What's the difference between? I know what the difference is, but what are some of the key differences between AT and Spectrum? And do you guys all hang out every now and again?
Yeah, Jim Walters was one of the founders of Adventist Today, and he and I are in constant communication. At the time, Spectrum was really a journal, so it's coming out quarterly. There was no web presence. And there was clearly a need in Adventism for a little bit more newsy thing. And so Adventist Today really modeled itself on something like Newsweek or Time at that time that came out more frequently and was a little bit more contemporary. And, they started with a bang because I know this history because I've talked to their founders. They had bought this massive mailing list, and they were going to print their first issue, and then Waco happened, and they were like, stop the presses, and they got this incredible picture of David Koresh with a gun on the cover, and it was just, rad because it just went out, and there was just like this fresh, breaking kind of news thing. And Spectrum at the time was putting out, footnoted articles about different institutional issues, and they just really were the kind of fresh news thing.
What year was that?
I think 1994.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're fairly new kids on the block.
Yeah. And there's So they kind of filled a space. Just, it's kind of classic market economy. You're cruising along, selling widget A, and suddenly somebody realizes, hey, there's a gap in the market. I can come in and fill that spot. So, that's I celebrate that.
Hmm. Can you see any from Debbie Hooper there in that forum? And again, thank you everyone for your comments and for watching
Is this
today.
on the Facebook page?
Yes, it's on the promo for today. While you're looking there, I'll just bring up a couple of other.
Yeah, if you see one that you think I see, she says one. Alex made a cryptic point about Australian dissidents. If he meant Australian dissidents were a bit irreverent, but I welcome him to Aussie landom. I saw that. That's not really a question, though.
She wrote a list of questions.
I saw a bunch from Graham here. Matt, I mean, if he was GC president, what would he do? That's probably two. We've gone a long time here, so
that's for a whole other interview. We'll have you back and go. If Alex was president, what would he do?
Number one, it would never happen, so we don't really have to worry about that.
Now, those watching, because it is getting late for Alexander, and I tell you what, you've sorry, Debbie has written here. I deleted them as they were answered already.
So okay, great.
But yeah, Debbie writes a lot for AT, and I don't know if she's done any work for you guys, but she's
I welcome it.
Group. You could reach out and chat to each other. Very good journalist and writer. And there's a lot of great questions there in Facebook. So those watching on YouTube, come and join the Facebook group if you're not already there. And the link is below in the description. And cut and paste some of these questions, because I know that Alexander is a member of the Facebook group, SDAQ&A, and has been brilliant the last 24 hours engaging with conversation there. So, Alexander, at your leisure over the next few days, you might like to pop in and answer some questions on this feed that's live there at the moment, as well as on the promo feed. Sure. So what I'm going to do is just a couple of quick rapid fire ones, and then we're going to wrap it up, because I know that it's getting late there, and I really so much value your time today. Thank you. No. The problem is there's no little simple easy ones that we can take as a comment. Look, let's James Andres. How are you, James? Good to have you watching. Here's a nice deep one, and then we'll just go with a couple of closing questions. Question for Alexander: do you think that SDA soteriology has migrated, or is it still squarely based on the salvation by partnership, i.e. God and man cooperating in the quest for salvation? That's a good question. That's probably a whole program on its own too, but it's a good one. Thank you, James.
Yeah, I would say that the there was I think a moment there in the 70s and 80s where Adventists were really they were trying to solve a problem in Adventism that the investigative judgment had created, where people really doubted their salvation, and they did, and that generation I think did really good hard work, and that I don't see among later generations as much fear and trembling about salvation. Your kind of average pastor doesn't terrify people as much as they used to and manipulate them, or kind of bumble around trying to straddle a kind of evangelical mainstream Protestantism with Adventism's idiosyncrasies, or the early Adventism's idiosyncrasies. Let me say it that way. So that I think is it's I think what's happened is I can see it here in Sacramento. You've got Doug Batchelor with his Granite Bay Church. And there's a certain type of approach to soteriology, and I think that that there's probably there's a little bit more human effort required in the salvation sanctification conversation than at some other churches. And I think that that's different across the Adventism that I see. And we're getting more and more folks. About half the people who visit the Spectrum website are not from North America. And so that's really helping me to get a little bit of a window into the kind of Adventism that's emerging, which really, I think that social issues, women's ordination, LGBTQ equality, debates that often reflect, the kind of internal changes that are happening in society have kind of overtaken as hot button points. I think that, what was that book, Adventist Hot Potatoes, that came out back in the day? I think social issues there's more hot potatoes that are social issues than I think that are focused on salvation, although I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing. I just think that that's where a lot of the real fights are right now. If you look at, the critics of Spectrum, they get really mad at us, not for doctrinal things so much, but for, what we say about women's ordination, for example.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we're going to wrap it up with 3 questions that you can answer as quickly as or as long as you like, but I definitely would love to have you back. And I was just pondering an idea. When you do go to the council, I'd love to maybe check in with you for just 10 minutes each day of council, and just go live here for 10 minutes and just say, this is what happened today, here's great, keep an eye out, and then that's it.
Sure, let's do it. It sounds fun.
That'd be awesome, because I tried to do that
exhausted.
myself.
I'll probably be in a foul mood because I hate it. I really do. So much time is wasted.
Well, I tried to siphon through the last one, and I watched everything, every hour, every day. And I was taking notes.
Welcome back to the denomination, Peter. You are a true Adventist. You've put in the work.
I put in the work. Are you getting more organized? Not that you ever have not been organized, but is there going to be, you were saying there's a bit of a push coming. Are you going to be kind of building your chapters, the forum chapters? And I've just brought up the website. Can people find where their local nearest chapter is if they go to spectrummagazine.org?
That chapter system is mostly collapsed. It was a real moment in time.
Right.
They function more as Sabbath schools now. So there's one, the Faith and Reason Sabbath School at Sligo Church, that meets essentially as a forum chapter.
Okay.
And there's 120 Zoom accounts on there, basically every Sabbath. Then you have, there's an active Berrien Springs chapter. And they're bringing in a kind of new generation of leadership. So there's some hope there.
Are those Sabbath schools and chapters at least listed on the website? Because I think a lot of people would love to be involved in something locally.
Every week we put about 4 active streams that anyone can join. And they usually have, a Spectrum quality presenter. In fact, there's a really good one happening at the PUC chapter. That just came in. We just posted it there. So yeah, you can go to the website and there's usually 4 to choose from each Sabbath.
Okay, well that's good. Well, I encourage people to go to that website. Just quickly, Gospel Adventist wrote What Happened to Martin Weber. He wrote The Hot Potatoes. I interviewed Martin. I interviewed Martin Weber sometime back, season 2 or 3, and that was a great interview. He's got some really good insights into Dez Ford as well.
Where was he at that time?
I cannot remember, and
he was communication director for the union, the Mid-America Union.
Yeah. I don't know where he is now. I've still got his contact details. I'm going to reach out again, and I think he's actually a member inside SDAQ&A. I'll tag him later and see.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, to wrap things up, we chatted off air earlier about why ideas matter.
Yeah.
But why logic, as commonly used in Adventism, needs a critical overhaul. Can you unpack a little bit about that?
I saw somebody ask there if I've written a book. No, I haven't.
You should. And is there a book on the history of spectrum and on Roy Branson?
That's a good. No, and that's something we need to fix. There's been histories written about spectrum that we've published in journal form. We are just mentioned we are republishing Mary Kay Silver MacLeod's book Betrayal.
Oh yes, I'll buy that for sure.
So she has been. I've made an arrangement with her for us to be the archive for that history.
Wow,
and she is great. Could
you put me in touch with her? I'd love to try and get her on the show.
Perfect. Let me do that. I'll make a note here.
That would be awesome. Just don't promote this book.
Yeah. How do you just have that so handy?
I often bring it out.
Yeah.
Adventism. Yeah. She did so much for the.
She's had a very interesting.
I would love to have
spiritually exploratory postscript to the Adventist part. So I think your audience would really enjoy her. If I was to write a book, I think I would do it. I would call it The Logic of Adventism, because one of the things you experience in this role is every church has a guy who thinks he's cracked the code of Daniel 11. And you just get unsolicited manuscripts trying to figure out the king of the north and the south.
It just brought back many memories of nights of being billeted after gigs. And 1 in 3 Adventist families I stayed with had one of those guys.
And it's got me really, obviously it's a fantasy to take months from this busy life right now, but one day I'd love to, because what happens is you dive in, and there is again an internal logic. You jump from this word to this word to this text to this text to this logical point to this, and there's a kind of internal logic there. But again, the premises are the problem with logic. That's what Socrates was trying to help us think about, and that's what kind of 20th century critique of logic helps us think about. So we really pat ourselves on the back because we kind of have imported a kind of 18th century Scottish common sense approach to belief, and I will probably step on a few toes in a variety of quarters of Adventism, maybe even toes close to me, because it's really what I would want to do is just show that this kind of snug logic that we inherited from a few farmers who were deists. They were guys who were reading John Locke and thinking through issues in a way that was constructive and exciting in a new country. But in fact, that logic is a lie, and it's important for us to recognize that we have to really look at the premises, and then that would get into a thing that's really interesting to me, is thinking about how we know what we think we know, epistemology, and then that would be a thing on hermeneutics. I think that's the real problem in Adventism is it's absurd that we have a book called the Adventist Hermeneutic, and you have to buy into the Adventist hermeneutic to believe Adventist beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole interview there too.
If you're going to drive the car, you have to also own the company, and it will only go on the roads owned by the company. It's like old mining towns where to buy something from the store, you had to get the script from the mine operator, and it was a closed system. And as long as we require a closed system, we've got a problem. It's a fragile system that breaks apart. It's broken apart in many of the people here who consider themselves ex-Adventists, is because you just wake up and realize, wait a second, there's a whole world out there that Adventism is not acknowledging. And
there's a lot of hurt, confused, and a lot of people. Hal Southwell wrote something earlier about the freedom he's felt leaving the church and fellowshipping with other Christians that don't have to look through the Adventist lens anymore. And there's a lot to be said for that, for those who decide to do that. Quick plug again for one of the kind of chapters, the E14 Sabbath School Curramong Australia. Very much, I know that they're very much supportive of your work. So
for a long time, there's a great chapter down in Adelaide.
Yeah, I tell you what, if there's not, and I think you said there's not, that you just highlight them every now and again. It'd be fantastic if someone on your team could just make a list with links on one page on spectrum.org. I would plug that, every week, because a lot of people say to me, where do I go? Where do I go? They don't want to really leave the Adventist kind of thing, but they want to gather with like-minded people. So I'll send them to the Spectrum Church.
Cool.
And don't forget, we have our own SDAQ&A church this Friday with Mike. Sorry, Mike, he's probably watching. Colburn, and got tongue-tied there. And then a lot of people just go all together and find other fellowships. Okay, so wrapping it up, you mentioned that there's a big push about to come from the progressives about women's ordination. I've heard via the grapevine there's a big union kind of gathering here in Australia soon. It's upon us, I think. Those watching can share with me that, and that they're expecting to demonstrate a big pushback to this kind of Ted Wilson authoritarian control. Do you have any insights to thinking that Ted Wilson may also be preparing a big pushback to that pushback? And what if he gets in again? And then I've got one last question.
I continue to be hearing nothing conclusive on him, his future. There's some people who are in the know that really see him, running again very actively, and some of the stuff he's doing around the world right now, very prominently part of evangelistic series with eye-popping numbers. It looks like a campaign to many people. Then I also hear that people are, leaders are very tired of him and are willing to, support someone else. So I don't know yet. And but we're pumping people for information. That's what we do here.
And you'll be sharing some of that, I'm guessing, as you go through.
We're journalists, and when we can report something factually, we do. I think that the Mid-America Union is supporting women's ordination, and what's been happening is that Ted Wilson has been so rigid on this. What's interesting is that he's stopped demonizing on this. He's moved on to other topics because he's essentially politically losing this. It doesn't freak out union presidents in Africa the way that it used to. There's other emerging issues that are catching their attention, and the reality is that culture changes, and it kind of, when you're talking about 22 million plus people, you've got a lot of different places for that ooze of change to happen. And there's cool, like, multi-generation Adventists in Brazil who sound to me like, they could be enjoying this show. Their kind of thoughtful critique of what they grew up with. So I would not, when you bring together 2,000 delegates and 50,000 Adventists into one place, it can be a big rah propaganda moment, but it can also, as many a leader has learned, it can also suddenly you have that public square, and the winds can change, and conversations can happen. And that's why I'm very, very interested to see what will happen at this next GC session, because it's you've had a regime in place for a while, and Ted Wilson, if you look at him at GYC in 2010, he got up on that stage and really committed himself to the self-supporting world.
Yeah.
I watched video of him at the private Weimar meeting at the GC session in 2010, where he went and said, "You are the blueprint for Adventist education," to the Weimar people. When he was elected, his first interview was not with Adventist media, not with the Review, not with ANN. He went to 3ABN, which was not allowed in the meeting.
But isn't he concerned that therefore that kind of promotion, people funnel all their money to 3ABN and not to the church coffers? Like, I know over here, I won't reveal names, but I've chatted to several SPD level people, union level people, super concerned with Australia's 3ABN and other independents that I won't mention, who are taking all the money, but then they seem to promote them.
That's the most, and I'm not making it, this is a fact, the most disruptive people at the 2022 GC session were Ted Wilson's base, who they were the kind of anti-vax crowd who were really pissed off at the GC for their mandate. And they were interrupting sessions. Ted Wilson, and those were people who, when Ted is manipulating, and I've heard that word, he has turned off some church leaders at the GC by the way he's manipulated the delegate selection for this coming GC session. But that trickles down, and their people put on their people, and his own base created a headache for him and other church leaders, and he had to come out publicly, suspend the thing. I mean, we have all these like Robert's Rules of Order, but when it's time for Ted Wilson to speak, somehow we abandon all those rules. Anyway, he had to tell them to knock it off. So it's really important when you see politically, you need a base, but that base can become its own beast. And sometimes your own, there's more than one leader who has been assassinated by his own followers because the followers feel like he has kind of lost the truth or made compromises. So Ted Wilson, that's why I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And you brought up money. We're trying to end here, but that is the third rail of Adventism. When, we're starting to see, it's hard to get people back into congregations. By the way, I saw someone mention the Sydney Adventist Forum, and they do really great programming. That's Graham Fraunfelder who asked those great questions and has a heap more back there in the group. So the money question is really a problem, and there's a couple of folks who have kind of morphed out of that vaccine mandate anger and are basically saying, trying to make arguments for a diversion of tithe.
That's the Conrad Vine kind of thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the Conrad Vine, I'm hoping he's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks' time, and he he is kind of proving what you're saying. He's kind of that Ted Wilson base, but he's suddenly saying, not only am I going to get you guys to divert your money into independent ministries, but just divert it away where you kind of want.
To an underground network of churches.
I know. And then there was an interesting response to that with the huge camp meeting that he recently spoke at, which apparently is one of the biggest numbers of Adventists gathering in one place in this particular area.
This is the northern Maine thing.
Yes.
Where you I would.
And they wrote back about that, and they're trying to kind of say, well, wasn't really official, but they were trying to support Conrad Vine as well, because they know their base love Ted Wilson and them as well. So that
I'd want to see the numbers. I wouldn't say it was.
Yeah, it might have been.
I watched those videos. It reminded me of some, some enthusiastically attended small gatherings of independent-minded Adventists.
Yes, I think that might have been the case too.
Yeah.
So last question, and by the way, Darren Pratt, my neighbour, literally, I could pick up this cup, open the mouth, throw it, and it'd be on his backyard, has said, Peter, the true Adventist, love it. Who else watches every hour of Autumn Council? Thank you. And he goes, thank you both for the most informative interview. I don't know why, Darren. In fact, if you'd been listening over the fence, I listened to 90% of that with my garage door rolled up, working here in the shed. This is my shed and studio, this side, shed that side. And I'm surprised he didn't hear it and benefit from it. It was fascinating. It was actually one of the most boring Autumn Councils I've ever had to listen to. But anyway, okay, last question.
We'll be there listening to every word and reading the documents. So
let's try.
Everyone that's healthier than you doesn't have to.
Yeah, that's right. Let's do that. That idea I suggested, where we'll just catch up if we can every day or every second day, and we'll just go live for 10 minutes. What's on the ground there happening today? I'll love that. That'd be good. Okay, last question. How is Spectrum growing today? And unpack a little bit of the Spectrum future.
Yeah.
What's in the path? What's unfolding? Yeah.
It was really hand to mouth for all these years. We did a big fundraising campaign thanks to the vision of the board. And so we now have we have money set away. We raised $1 million. We built a brand new award-winning website. We're growing. The phrase I always use is we do three things. We do scholarship, we do investigative reporting, and we publish creative expressions of people's spiritual experience. So we do all of that. And the numbers on our website are up. Our journal subscription is kind of this nice steady thing. I changed it. If people want an electronic copy to kind of check it out, I'm happy to send them a PDF. And then I treat it like I do with my membership to my local museum. I think it should exist. I want to support it. Do I go to every show? No. Do they send me a little thing, a paper thing in the mail, kind of showing me a nice kind of magazine about the beautiful culture that they're helping to preserve and educate a variety of people in my community? Yeah. Do they send it to me sometimes if I forget to, there's 3 months between the time I donate? Yeah. So that's how I treat the journal. Folks want to give us $100, I'll get the journal to you. You can stay in touch. If you want to continue supporting us, that's great. But I also want you to kind of see what I think of as the highest quality writing in Adventism. And we have started to win awards outside Adventism in the Associated Church Press. So we're kind of part of that Christian Century crowd. I know those editors, the Sojourners editors. If you're in Canada, Broadview magazine. So we're thinking about the Adventism and beyond. And one of the ways that we're doing that is bringing in a new generation. So we went from like 2 people on staff to, thanks to Zoom and lots of young people who just graduated from college, have a place to live at home where they're kind of thinking about their next job, but learn to do really great writing, reporting, copy editing. So I have every Wednesday, I'm going to be getting up soon.
Yeah.
And we're going to have probably 12 people on our staff call, all of them younger than me, very diverse. And this strategic planning process is going to be led by a whole new generation of folks as a steering committee, although we'll be having large conversations. So folks who are part of our advisory council who give us $500 a year. We started doing quarterly calls, kind of like a company will do quarterly reports where I talk about our finances, our impact, our metrics, and then the projects that we're working on. But here's just an example of the people who are going to be helping us think about the future of the organization.
Yeah.
And I'm really thinking about Spectrum as a think tank.
Yes.
So we've been kind of a media organization, but the borders between the structures of Adventist academia are starting to crumble in scary ways, at least in the West. And I think we need to get really serious about ideas. I think that the pen is mightier than the sword, and I think that that's why all the folks who have needed to take a break from Adventism, I understand that, but I don't want you to, if you can stand it, I welcome your thoughts on Adventism, because I think there's an opportunity within Adventism to, it's not a monolith and it's not a beast that's unbeatable. And I think that there's some things in there that are worth transforming. And there's a whole history of think tanks working in countries to help those countries think about the future in really dedicated ways. So I'm thinking about what happens if we kind of bring together minds in an even more intentional way to think about how we can turn our educational system, number one, transform it in a rapidly changing world, make it more contextual, but also make it really mission driven. And I don't mean that necessarily evangelistic, but I mean really driven by some values beyond just, keeping kids in the church. What happens if we're really helping the rest of the world gain the tools that we need to survive as a planet?
Yeah, I like that.
Until Jesus comes.
I like that focus. So those watching, probably the best just go-to place to be directed wherever you want to go is there, spectrummagazine.org. You can learn about making donations. So if you want to if you're a fringe Adventist, any Adventist, if you want to become involved, go and check out the work Alexander and his team are doing there at spectrummagazine.org. And if you're a fringe Adventist, you don't want to leave the church, but you really want to have this sense of fellowship, go and find your nearest chapter, your nearest Sabbath school, send an email if it's not listed there. And I'm sure Alexander's team.
Yeah, people can email me at alexander@spectrummagazine.org. And I see Rochelle there asking, yes, I've printed many things from former non-Adventists. Really just interested in the ideas that you're working with.
And I think Lauren Seibel from Adventist Today recently said a similar thing, that they're more than willing to present articles by former Adventists as well.
The Adventist Church needs your voice.
Yeah. And one last quick plug for my own little happening.
Yes. Support,
if that's okay.
Peter, support at SDAQ&A, which is a great title.
Thank you very much. So we'll be back on Twitter very soon because of donations I've had in the last month. We've got our website now up and running because of donations we've had in the last month. And if you want to join my I won't be presenting myself. I can't do it, but who want to listen to gospel messages that are totally unfiltered by the Adventist perspective, we'll be running them weekly or fortnightly here on SDAQ&A. And Mike Colburn will be on this Friday, my Friday, your Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And my next thing I'm trying to raise money for is a year's StreamYard, which is a platform very much like what I use here. And that platform is where I'm going to be encouraging presenters to go live at different times that might suit people all around the world to hear totally unfiltered via the SDA lens. But as I said, those of you that love the Adventist lens and want to kind of kick around with that, go over there to Spectrum. Find people that are like-minded, hang out with them. As Gwen wrote a little earlier, she talked about the E14 Sabbath school class, and they love it. There's a bunch of them there that get together every week, and they have potluck lunch. So yeah, there we go. So go and check out Spectrum on the link I just put up there. Well, any closing words there, Alexander? We've covered a whole lot of ground today. I wanted to do that in the long form because I wanted to create a resource here to really touch a lot of ground, and people can. There's already several people that have written to me and said we're watching this one again and again to pick out all the bits and pieces, and I'm sure we could talk for many more hours as well. And looking forward to October. I'll hold you to that.
Great. Yeah, let's do it. Somebody asked how often Spectrum's published. We put something on the website every single day, and we publish the journal quarterly, so 4 times a year.
Awesome. Just another, we're doing all the plugs. Gwen has just reminded me, E14 Sabbath School is done live via Zoom. So you can go there and have potluck, or you can watch every week on Zoom as well. I've often watched as well. So yeah, there we go. And thank you everyone for your involvement. Any closing words there, Alexander, or
No, I just think I'm glad you're doing this, Peter. I really encourage you to keep up the good work. You're really you're doing something that Spectrum can't do, and I'm glad that you're able to do this, and you're really bringing in. I've benefited from watching shows that you've done, and I appreciate your eclectic approach. It's a great mix of what Adventism really is, which means, and I don't mean that in the church sense. I mean, you have a vision for it, and I appreciate it, and it fits. Spectrum's. We have a mission statement. It's not complex. It's creating community through conversation, and sounds like you're along a fellow traveler, and I'm really glad to meet you and to talk with you in this public way with lots of people listening and jumping in.
Fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for watching. Until next time, Alexander Carpenter. I hope you have a good sleep tonight.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Let's get the right